Chapter 92. 9 Emperors of the Way of the Sword? Xueqi deactivated the Hell King's possession and looked curious. He and Jiang Shui had heard Qiu Bailey mention the 9 Emperors of the Way of the Sword. Since ancient times, they were the 9 strongest sword emperors in the Sword Dao. They were legends in the hearts of countless sword cultivators. Zhao Congjian, Bei Shao Wangjian, and Huang Lianxin had also heard of the legend of the 9 Emperors of the Way of the Sword. What do you think? It was good news, right? Do you want it? Daoya Old Man asked with a smile, like an old man trying to trick a little girl. Zhao Congjian said in disdain, "My master." "Shut up." Xueqi turned around and stared at him. Zhao Congjian felt wronged and could only remain silent. Xueqi looked at Daoya Old Man and asked, "Where is the inheritance?" At the same time, he asked the sword spirit in his heart if he could accept the Sword Emperor's inheritance. Of course you can. As long as it's about the Sword Dao, Swordmaster can become stronger without any worries. The Supreme Legendary Sword System will help Swordmaster continue on his path. The Sword Spirit replied quickly, which made Xueqi very satisfied. He was afraid that the system would place too many restrictions on him. However, the Supreme Legendary Sword System was not bad. It was very open-ended, and it only had one rule. He could only walk the path of the sword. Daoya Old Man flipped his right hand, and a small golden sword appeared in his palm. Send your divine sense into it and you can start the inheritance test. You only have one chance. If you don't pass the test, the sword will turn into dust. So you have to be prepared. Hearing Daoya Old Man's reminder, Xueqi took the sword. The others gathered around and looked at the small golden sword curiously. Daoya Old Man turned around, waved his hand and said with a smile, "I'm leaving. Grand Disciple, I'll wait for you to defeat the Sword Monarch of Great Zhou and become famous in the Northern Wilderness region. Don't worry about me. I'm living a carefree life." He walked elegantly, like an immortal traveling the mortal world. However, he did not receive a reply. Xueqi and the others focused their attention on the small golden sword. After walking for 100 meters, he looked back. Sigh. He sighed and disappeared on the spot. "Thank you," Xueqi looked up and said softly, looking at where he had left. Zhao Congjian could not help but ask, "Master, are you really going to inherit the legacy of the ancient sword emperors? With your talent, you will definitely be in existence on the same level as the 9 emperors of the Way of the Sword in 1,000 years. Xueqi looked up at him and sighed. "From the sword, bend over," Xueqi said softly. Zhao Congjian was confused, but he still lowered his head obediently. Jiang Shui, Bei Shao Wangjian, and Huang Lianxin were all curious. Xueqi stretched out his hand and rubbed the back of Zhao Congjian's head. "Congjian, you are good at everything, except that you are stubborn. Humans are humans because they know how to be flexible." He sighed. "I did say that everyone has their own way of the sword, but gathering the strengths of 100 schools of thought is also the way to forge one's own way of the sword. Of course, this requires an extremely strong mental fortitude, and one must maintain their original heart. You must grasp this point well." Zhao Congjian was deep in thought. Northern Valiant Sword and Huang Lianxin were also thinking about this. The little black snake at the side rolled its eyes and thought to itself, "I really believe your nonsense." Jiang Shui pulled Xueqi's clothes and reminded him, "Xuanji, you only have one chance. You must be careful." Xueqi nodded and said, "Don't worry. I know what I'm doing." The Sword Monarch of Great Zhou values Jinghong a lot. Together with the Sword Monarch's great reputation, he will not harm Jinghong. We don't have to rush to save him. The reason why there was no rush was because he was not powerful enough. He looked down at the small golden sword in his hand and fell into deep thought. Zhao Congjian got up and left. He kept mumbling to himself, "Maintain your original heart. Maintain your original heart." All these years, under Xueqi's guidance, he had never taken the wrong path. His progress in the sword's way was very smooth, so he would seriously consider every word that Xueqi taught him. Northern Valiant Sword and Huang Lianxin left separately and continued their sword training. Jiang Shui did not disturb Xueqi but returned to the mountain to internalize qi and cultivate. 3 months later, Xueqi broke through to Inner Pellet Level 2. That night, he took out the small golden sword and prepared to receive the inheritance. He gathered Jiang Shui and the rest so that no one would disturb him. When he probed into the small golden sword with his mind, boom! Something exploded in his mind. When he opened his eyes again, he realized that he was standing high up in the sky. The blue sky was above his head, and beneath his feet was a sea of clouds. He was shocked and felt that there was an invisible floor beneath his feet. Could it be an illusion? At this moment, a black shadow appeared in front of him. It was hundreds of meters tall, like a mountain. The black shadow only had a silhouette and could not be seen clearly. I am the sky-sundering sword emperor, Wang Xiaofei. Junior, if you wish to obtain my inheritance, you must pass my test. His voice was domineering like that of a god. Even Zhou Xuanji could not help but worship him. Sky-sundering sword emperor? What a chinibu! Zhou Xuanji ridiculed in his heart, but on the surface, he looked expectant. No matter how bad the 9 emperors of the Way of the Sword were, they should at least have heaven-grade sword techniques, right? The first test is to fight someone of a higher level. Your cultivation is at the 2nd level of the inner dance stage. You need to defeat a soul swordsman at the 2nd level of the spirit spring stage. Do you dare to accept? Wang Xiaofei asked, and Zhou Xuanji replied without hesitation, come. Then, a black shadow of a swordsman appeared in front of him. He was 1.8 meters tall and was far less intimidating than Wang Xiaofei's shadow. Zhou Xuanji took out the thunderclap sword and used the 8-step sword lunge, coming up to the soul swordsman. 6 afterimages appeared around Zhou Xuanji. It was the 6-path sword shadow body. Zhou Xuanji stabbed toward the soul swordsman, and so did the 6-path sword shadow. Boom! The soul swordsman perished. Before it could even attack, it was defeated by Zhou Xuanji in an instant. Zhou Xuanji had cultivated the Sword Qi Golden Body incantation to the 3rd level, Sword Qi Soar. Both his physical strength and Sword Qi were powerful. Together with the gold-grade legendary swords, how could a Soul Fountain level 2 not be destroyed? The second test is a Soul Swordsman at the 5th level of the Spirit Spring stage. Do you dare to accept? Wang Xiaofei continued to ask. His tone was emotionless, as though he was unconscious. Fight! Just when Zhou Xuanji spoke, the Soul Swordsman appeared. He waved his right hand, and numerous legendary swords appeared above his head. He charged at the Soul Swordsman with the 10 swords mode. 10 legendary swords flew toward the Soul Swordsman like bolts of lightning. The Soul Swordsman swung its sword to block, but it could not withstand the impact of 10 legendary swords. It immediately jumped away. Swoosh! The Ghost Curse sword pierced through the Soul Swordsman with the ranged sword propelling. It was destroyed again. Zhou Xuanji frowned and mumbled, too weak. It's like fighting a robot. If the Soul Swordsman was a real person, he would be even more powerful. The third test. Within 3 days, cultivate an Earth-grade low-tier sword technique to small accomplishment. Wang Xiaofei's voice came again. Next, an ancient book appeared in front of Zhou Xuanji. Zhou Xuanji stored his swords and flipped through the ancient book. He memorized all the sword moves and threw the book aside. He was extremely confident. Moonlight Wind Sword Dance. He took out the book cutter sword and began practicing. There were a total of 108 sword moves. He used 10 breaths time to complete 1 round, which was extremely fast. After all, he had already mastered many sword techniques. Many of the sword moves were similar, so it was easy for him to use them. After 100 rounds, the Moonlight Wind Sword Dance reached small accomplishment. After 300 rounds, the Moonlight Wind Sword Dance reached great accomplishment. After 500 rounds, the Moonlight Wind Sword Dance reached Sword Will. Zhou Xuanji stored his swords. He was a little dissatisfied and shook his head, saying, "An hour is still too slow." He looked at Wang Xiaofei and prepared for the next test. However, the sky-sundering sword emperor, Wang Xiaofei, did not continue with the next test. A long while later. Brat, you are F***king cheating. Wang Xiaofei cursed suddenly, which stunned Zhou Xuanji. Ugh. This thing has consciousness. Chapter 93. Have you practiced this sword technique before? Deliberately putting on an act? Wang Xiaofei's 100-meter-tall shadow asked, his tone somewhat angry. Zhou Xuanji raised his brow and said, "This is my first time seeing this sword technique." "I don't believe it." No one can cultivate an earth-grade sword art sword intent in such a short time. Wang Xiaofei said in a low voice. Judging from his tone, he was ready to end the inheritance test at any time. Zhou Xuanji said impatiently, "If you don't believe me, take out another sword technique." "How dare you question me? The supreme legendary sword system that I designed is just that overpowered." Another ancient book appeared before Zhou Xuanji. Zhou Xuanji took it and flipped through it. He realized that this sword technique was even more difficult than the Moonlight Wind Dance sword dance. It wasn't just a little difficult. Soul Eater Slash. The name sounded awesome, but who knew what kind of power it would have once it was mastered? He took out the swine culling sword and began to practice. The first time, he spent 20 breaths of time. The second time only took 10 breaths of time. After repeating it 100 times, the Soul Eater Slash had reached the small success stage. After 300 repetitions, the Soul Eater Slash was completed. After 500 repetitions, the Soul Eater Slash achieved sword intent. Zhou Xuanji sheathed his sword and was pleasantly surprised. If this sword technique was used by the Ghost Curse sword, it would simply be able to kill gods and demons. The lethality was too great. He pretended to be expressionless and said, "What do you say?" Wang Xiaofei was silent. Zhou Xuanji stared at him and said, "You don't want to admit it?" Wang Xiaofei's tone was complicated as he said, "Which almighty being are you the reincarnation of?" Zhou Xuanji replied, "I'm from the sanctum of China. My name is Sword God Zhou." Sword God? This level of comprehension is indeed godly. Wang Xiaofei said faintly. Then, he changed the topic and said, "Forget about the remaining dozens of rounds, you passed the assessment directly." Dozens of stages? Zhou Xuanji opened his eyes wide. So cunning. If this went on, who could stand it? "You have two choices. One is the Emperor's sword that I left behind, and the other is a sword technique that I left behind," Wang Xiaofei continued. Zhou Xuanji frowned and asked, "You're one of the 9 emperors of the Way of the Sword. Why are you so petty?" Wang Xiaofei coldly snorted and proudly said, "No matter which one I choose, I will be able to move unhindered in the world." Zhou Xuanji thought for a while and decided to take the sword. No matter how strong a sword technique was, it still required spiritual energy as a foundation. King's sword. If it was a good sword, he could even fuse it with his legendary sword. It might even be able to give birth to an amethyst divine sword. Of course, it could also be used alone. When you get out, the Emperor's sword will appear in your hand. All right, the inheritance is over. Wang Xiaofei's tone became cold again. Zhou Xuanji blinked and asked curiously, "I really want to know, are you dead or alive?" Humph. Wang Xiaofei waved his hand, and next, Zhou Xuanji felt everything around him shatter. As if he had awoken from a dream, he opened his eyes and saw Jiang Shue's face, causing him to tremble in fear. He called out, "What are you doing?" Zhao Tsongjian, Bei Shao Wangjian, and Huang Lianxin turned around. Jiang Shui was also frightened. She clutched her chest and curled her lips. "Just look at you. Is there a need to be so exaggerated?" Zhou Xuanji rolled his eyes. Getting so close would scare him to death. Zhao Tsongjian quickly asked, "So fast? Did master fail?" Zhou Xuanji stared at him and said, "Are you looking down on me, your master?" He told them about the process of the test, and everyone sighed in amazement. Dozens of stages? What a scam. Bei Shao Wangjian asked curiously, "Master, where's the Emperor's sword? Take it out and let us see." "Oh yeah, where's the Emperor's sword?" Zhou Xuanji looked down and saw that the small golden sword in his hand was not the Emperor's sword. That old man lied to me? Zhou Xuanji frowned. At this moment, the small golden sword suddenly exploded into countless golden specks of light. The specks of light quickly formed into a giant sword that was 1.5 meters long. The sword was entirely golden, and its blade was 30 centimeters wide. 2 golden dragons coiled around the hilt, which looked extremely majestic. So this is the Emperor's sword? It weighs 5,000 kilograms. Zhou Xuanji mumbled to himself. If not for his powerful body, he might have been smashed into meat paste. When the others heard this, they all reached out and shook hands. Jiang Shui and Huang Lianxin could not even lift it up. Zhao Tsongjian had it easy, but Bei Shao Wangjian was struggling. Sword Spirit, What grade is this sword? Zhou Xuanji asked curiously in his heart. The Emperor's Sword of the Sky, Sundering Sword Emperor should be more than gold grade, right? The sword spirit needs to examine it. Do you want to keep it in the Supreme Legendary Sword system? Keep it. As Zhou Xuanji spoke, the Emperor's sword disappeared. Zhao Tsongjian curled his lip and said, "This inheritance is a little shabby. It seems like the 9 emperors of the Sword's Way are nothing more than this." Huang Lianxin guessed, maybe the period when he established the inheritance was not when he was at his peak, or maybe he just wanted to help his descendants and not really let someone inherit his legacy. The little black snake came over and said disdainfully, "A man who is never content is like a snake trying to swallow an elephant. 2 earth-grade sword techniques and a sword emperor's sword, what else do you want?" Beishao Wangjian said, "Lianxin, let's starve it for 7 days?" Huang Lianxin nodded. "Okay." The little black snake became anxious. "Aren't you too stingy?" Great Zhou's royal city. In an ancient-looking inn. A storyteller stood at the center of the first floor, surrounded by close to 100 people. He waved his folding fan and said with his eyes wide open, facing the threat of Tai Yulong and the other royal soldiers, "Sword God Zhou slashed with his sword." The sword's radiance illuminated the heavens and the earth. That scene could not be described with words. Hundreds of thousands of people in Guxia City sighed in admiration. A sword of a god. I heard that Sword God Zhou killed Tai Yulong and the others in an instant. He even slashed down a mountain and almost sank Guxia City. The audience cried out in astonishment. Their faces were filled with admiration. At this moment, a voice came from the corner of the inn. "Mister, who do you think is more powerful, Sword God Zhou or the Sword Monarch?" The storyteller stroked his goatee and pretended to be profound. "Actually, Sword God Zhou and the Sword Monarch had a battle before." With this, everyone opened their eyes wide. "Are you serious? How come I have never heard of it?" A muscular man held a bowl of wine and questioned. The storyteller said with a smile, "It's true. I saw it with my own eyes." They fought to a draw and admired each other. The Sword Monarch said that once Sword God Zhou appears in the world, he will be famous. As expected, Sword God Zhou became the first person on the reputation ranking of Great Zhou this year. Even the sword noble Shao Jinghong said that he was Sword God Zhou's disciple. The unparalleled Sword God Zhou, he truly lives up to his name. The crowd clapped and cheered as they listened to Sword God Zhou's stories. They all felt excited, as if they were Sword God Zhou themselves. Nonsense. Sword God Zhou is still far from the Sword Monarch of Great Zhou. He can't even be compared to the Sword Monarch's disciple. The voice came from the corner of the inn again. It was full of disdain. This time, he incurred the wrath of the crowd. Everyone turned to look, but in the next moment, their expressions changed. They all knelt down and did not dare to look at that person again. The storyteller was also shocked. He quickly knelt down and said with a trembling voice, "Your Highness." The person who spoke was the Crown Prince of the Great Zhou Empire, Zhou Tianyu. Zhou Tianyu looked like he was in his early 30s. He had a dignified face and a calm temperament. He wore a white shirt. The innkeeper was also shocked. He quickly ran over and asked with a stutter, "Your Highness, why are you here?" Zhou Tianyu drank a bowl of wine and said expressionlessly, "I passed by this inn and heard that someone was praising Sword God Zhou and belittling the Sword Monarch. So I came in to take a look." After that, he got up and walked towards the side door of the inn. When he reached the door, he suddenly stopped. With his back facing everyone in the inn, he said, "Sword God Zhou can't even protect his own disciple. He's not a hero. If he dares to challenge the Sword Monarch, I, Zhou Tianyu, am willing to take him as my teacher and let him be the Crown Prince's teacher. You can spread the word." "I don't think he dares to." Chapter 94. The Crown Prince of Great Zhou challenged Sword God Zhou in public. He claimed that if Sword God Zhou dared to challenge the Sword Monarch of Great Zhou, he would become Sword God Zhou's disciple. He did not say that Sword God Zhou had to win the challenge, but as long as he dared to challenge. This matter shook the Great Zhou dynasty. In just a few days, it spread to all the dynasties under the Great Zhou dynasty. Many people thought that Zhou Tianyu was too high profile. Sword God Zhou might not be as powerful as the Sword Monarch of Great Zhou, but he still had the courage to challenge the Sword Monarch. After all, Zhou Yalong is going to replace him, so he couldn't help but come out and cause trouble. What a joke! Who has sword god Zhou been afraid of? He even dared to go against the Empress of Great Zhou. Why would he be afraid of the sword monarch? Has the Great Zhou crown prince suffered a chi deviation? Clown! No wonder the Emperor of Great Zhou doesn't think highly of him. Almost everyone thought that Zhou Tianyu was playing to the gallery. Now, sword god Zhou was no longer the person who had just become famous. His battle achievements had pushed his reputation to the peak. Among the sword cultivators of Great Zhou, only the sword monarch of Great Zhou could suppress them. Sword god Zhou was an upright person, and he loved to help others. He was more reputable than Great Zhou's crown prince. After learning about the reaction of the outside world, Zhou Tianyu was so angry that he smashed the table and flew into a rage in his own house. This incident also made the world understand sword god Zhou's reputation. Unknowingly, sword god Zhou had become an unparalleled powerful cultivator in their hearts. Take me as your master? With his aptitude? I'm not interested. Zhou Xuanji snorted. Zhao Tsongjian was standing in front of him. Every 3 months, Zhao Tsongjian would go to the Zhou dynasty to find out about Xiao. This time, after hearing about Zhou Tianyu's provocation, he immediately came back to report. Zhao Tsongjian smiled. If Zhou Tianyu knew that you are his younger brother, what would he think? Zhou Xuanji said disdainfully, I don't have an elder brother like him. The other princes were all thinking of ways to win the hearts of the people, but this guy only knew how to talk. For example, Zhou Qingxin was not talented, but he worked hard. Then, Zhao Tsongjian passed on the news to the others. Jiang Shui pursed her lips. If he didn't provoke Xuanji, the world wouldn't know that the great Zhou dynasty has a crown prince. Northern Sword Valiant had a look of disdain. Frog at the bottom of the well. Huang Lianxin smiled. Brother Zhou Yalong is only a... The little black snake laughed. Ha ha ha. I admire him. Thus, the little black snake was starved for another 7 days. Time passed. After another 3 months, Zhou Xuanji broke through to inner pellet level 3. There was still a month before he turned 15. Now, his height had increased by leaps and bounds, and he had already reached 1.7 meters. Dressed in the white dragon golden robe, he was elegant and handsome. His black hair was tied at the back of his head, leaving a lock of black hair in front of his ears, revealing his forehead. Anyone who saw him would sigh in admiration. What a bright and handsome young man. After breaking through successfully, Zhou Xuanji got up slowly and stood on the top of the slope. He opened his arms and enjoyed the sunlight. Unknowingly, I'm almost 15. Sigh, back then, I boasted that I could dominate the world in 10 years. What a slap to my face. Zhou Xuanji sighed in his heart with squinted eyes. At this moment, a beautiful figure appeared behind him and hugged him. Zhou Xuanji pretended to be knocked down and cursed. Who dares to sneak attack me? Hand over your life. After saying that, he turned around to tickle Jiang Shui's waist. Jiang Shui had completely grown up. She looked about as tall as Zhou Xuanji. She wore a long yellow dress. Her hair was up, and her skin was fair. Her face was exquisite, and her eyes were captivating. When the two of them stood together, they looked so compatible, as though they were made for each other. I surrender. Stop. Jiang Shui quickly got rid of Zhou Xuanji's demonic claws. You only know how to tickle me. Zhou Xuanji snorted. That's what you get for sneak attacking me so often. Jiang Shui came up and pinched his face. Xuanji has grown up, and he is getting more and more rebellious. He used to let me play with him. Zhou Xuanji rolled his eyes at her and said, I think we need to sleep in separate rooms. You're already 18, and you still sleep on top of me every night. Now, he was afraid to sleep with Jiang Shui. After all, his body had already matured, and he could not stand the physical contact with Jiang Shui. Most importantly, Zhou Xuanji could sense that this girl would purposely rub against him every night, pushing him to the corner of the bed. No. Jiang Shui pulled Zhou Xuanji's face and snorted. Her eyes were filled with joy, and she was proud in her heart. It seems like what Sister Lianxin taught me was right. To prevent Zhou Xuanji from being lustful in the future, she thought that she had to continue with her plan. Zhou Xuanji had lived 2 lives. He saw the look in her eyes and immediately understood what was going on. This girl was flirting with him. Oh my! This girl is not innocent anymore. Zhou Xuanji sighed. Why did he have a premonition that he was about to lose his chastity? Jiang Shui put her hands behind her waist and clasped her fingers tightly. She leaned forward and bent down to look at him. It seems like my Xuanji level has indeed increased, she said, looking up at him. Seeing her cute look, Zhou Xuanji could not help but lean down and peck her on the lips. His kiss was like a dragonfly skimming the surface of the water. Jiang Shui was stunned. She opened her eyes wide, and she felt as though she was electrocuted. Zhou Xuanji smiled proudly and brushed past her. You dare to flirt with me? You are still far from it. He smiled and prepared to go down the mountain. At this moment, Jiang Shui pulled his hand. He turned around instinctively, and Jiang Shui dashed up to him. Just like before, she pecked him lightly on the lips and ran away quickly. Zhou Xuanji was stunned. Looking at her back as she ran away, his heart beat faster. What the hell? Is this the feeling of falling in love? Oh no, I was flirted with again. Zhou Xuanji was stunned on the spot and laughed foolishly. At the foot of the mountain, the little black snake, which was coiled on a giant rock, lowered its head. It could not bear to watch anymore. I have never seen such a shameless adulterer and adulterer. In broad daylight. Sigh. It heaved a long sigh and could not help but think of the female demons in its cave. Looking back, it had mixed feelings. Zhao Tsongjian and Beishao Wangjian were both training their sword techniques and did not notice the commotion on the mountain. Huang Lianxin noticed them, and she covered her mouth and giggled. A big and small heir were sleeping soundly next to each other. The sun set, and the moon rose. Zhou Xuanji returned to his house and prepared to rest. Every night, he would internalize qi in his house. He would first tell Jiang Shui a story, then sleep for a while. He would wake up when the sky was just brightening to absorb the violet qi from the east. Xuanji, what story are you telling me tonight? Jiang Shui sat on the wooden bed and asked as she combed her hair. Zhou Xuanji raised his brow and said, I'll tell you a love story. Jiang Shui heard him and her eyes brightened immediately. Tell me quickly. She cried out immediately. Zhou Xuanji sat beside her and said casually, Kiss me and I will tell you. Jiang Shui blushed and pouted coquettishly. What's there to kiss? When I was young, I kissed you every day. Didn't you think my saliva was dirty? Zhou Xuanji said righteously, that was in the past. Now. So fragrant. Jiang Shui felt sweet in her heart. She raised her chin and snorted, I'm not going to kiss you. If you don't kiss me, I won't tell you. Fine, I won't tell you. Please kiss me. Call me sister. Sister. Good boy. Come, put your face closer. Chapter 95. Early in the morning, the first ray of sunlight swept over from the horizon, streaking across the mountains and rivers. On top of a mountain, a black bull with a shoulder height of 15 meters was gazing into the distance. Its four limbs were muscular, and the black fur on its body was like steel needles. Its horns were like curved blades, and its eyes were cold and fierce. Standing on top of the mountain, it felt like a king. Tens of thousands of demon soldiers were crawling at the foot of the mountain. Most of them had already transformed and were waiting for the Black Yak's orders. Children, do you remember our goal? The Black Yak suddenly opened his mouth. His domineering voice reverberated throughout the mountains. Kill Sword God Zhou. Tens of thousands of demon soldiers roared in unison, scaring away the birds in the surrounding forest. The Black Yak twisted its body and stood upright, transforming into its human form. Hua, a black cloak appeared out of thin air, and he quickly put it on. He had the head of a bull and the body of a human. His skin was dark, and his face was wild. A terrifying blade that was 30 meters long appeared in his hand. The saber looked very exaggerated and oppressive. He raised his blade and roared furiously. My children, Sword God Zhou is hiding within a radius of 1,000 miles. Find him and inform me. Yes. Tens of thousands of demon soldiers shouted in unison, all of them quickly leaving. In less than 5 breaths of time, there was not a single demon soldier left at the foot of the mountain. The black bull laughed coldly. Sword God Zhou? I would like to see if you are really that strong. I will chop off your head. The Gulan demon emperor wants your head. After that, he laughed wildly, as though he had already obtained Sword God Zhou's head. Zhou Xuanji was sunbathing on the slope with his hands under his head, looking quite relaxed. At the foot of the mountain, Zhao Zongjian was teaching Bei Shao Wangjian. Jiang Shui was practicing her spells while Huang Lianxin was practicing her swordsmanship. The little black snake was being bullied by a big and small air. It was like a whip being tossed around, screaming miserably. The three-eyed drought rodent squeaked on a big's head. The Emperor Sword's grade has been detected. The sword spirit's voice suddenly resounded in Zhou Xuanji's mind. Next, 3 lines of words appeared before his eyes. Sword name: Sky Sundering Emperor Sword. Grade: Amethyst. Description: contains a sword soul and is forged from 5,000 kilograms of dark steel. It is indestructible, and when swung, the strength of the slash will be doubled. It possesses a special ability: the power of the ancient sword emperor. Can only be used once a year, and there are no side effects. The power of the ancient sword emperor? Once a year? Zhou Xuanji blinked and inwardly asked, how powerful is the power of the ancient sword emperor? He was in a wonderful mood. He did not expect that the first amethyst god sword would not be from the Supreme Legendary Sword System's lottery. 10,000 kilograms of Xian iron doubled his strength. To a Dharma cultivator, this was a devastating blow. It depends on the strength of the sword master. With every level he ascends, he'll be able to unleash more of the power of the ancient sword monarch, reaching the Mahayana realm at the very most. The sword spirit replied, which made Zhou Xuanji open his eyes wide. Mahayana realm. That was an existence that was about to ascend. He immediately became excited and took out the sky-sundering emperor sword. This golden dragon sword was so mighty that 5,000 kilograms of weight was nothing to Zhou Xuanji. He held the sky-sundering emperor sword in one hand and performed the moonlit wind sword dance. The giant sword danced with a domineering aura that could split mountains and rivers. At the foot of the mountain, Jiang Shui and the other 3 could not help but raise their eyebrows. Zhao Zongjian's eyes lit up and he mumbled, how domineering! I really want to learn. No. There were too many sword techniques he wanted to learn. Zhao Zongjian held back his excitement and turned around. Bei Shao Wangjian was also envious, but it was a pity that they did not have Zhou Xuanji's talent. They needed at least a few months to learn a set of sword techniques, and it would take years for them to reach black grade. After practicing the moonlit wind sword dance, Zhou Xuanji's hands were itching. He immediately gathered everyone and told them that he was going to a stronghold to train. He tried to come back at night. No one had any objections. Although Zhou Xuanji was only at inner pellet level 3, he was the most powerful among them. He left on the wind cutter sword and quickly disappeared into the horizon. Outside the border of Great Zhou, there were many criminals, evil cultivators, and tyrants who established strongholds or sections. There were countless of them. Zhao Zongjian, a big and small heir, discovered many of them. When Zhou Xuanji brought little Jiang Shui out to play occasionally, he saw traces of bandits. They flew for about 100 miles. Zhou Xuanji stopped suddenly and looked in the direction he was looking. In front of him was a barren land with few trees. The terrain was uneven. A majestic silhouette sat on a small hill. It was a bull demon in human form. He was extremely domineering, especially the horrifying broadsword beside him. Even though he was 1,000 meters away, Zhou Xuanji could not help but shudder in fear. Undefeatable. Could this demon be a 6th rank or even a 7th rank great demon king? Just as he was thinking, the bull demon's voice came. Young man, come here. I have something to ask you. If you don't come, I will cut you down with my broadsword. Zhou Xuanji curled his lip and flew over immediately. He could use this demon to test the power of the sky-sundering emperor sword. Soon he came up to the bull demon. The bull demon stared at him with eyes that were as big as bronze bells and shouted, I am Zongyo Dark Emperor. Have you heard of my name? In Great Zhou's territory, my name is used to scare kids like you. Zhou Xuanji stood on the wind cutter sword and pretended to be terrified. Great, King. What are you going to do? Zongyo Dark Emperor was satisfied. Zhou Xuanji's qi obscuring incantation was like nothing in front of him. He had already seen through Zhou Xuanji's cultivation, but he did not take it to heart. An inner pellet realm cultivator was still an ant to him. And it could not be Sword God Zhou. Too weak. Do you know where Sword God Zhou is? Zongyo Dark Emperor asked with a deep voice, staring at Zhou Xuanji. Zhou Xuanji looked as though he was about to cry. He replied with a trembling voice. No. Why are you looking for him? Zongyou Dark Emperor snorted coldly. To kill him, of course. I heard that sword god Zhou is short, but his sword technique is one of the best in Great Zhou. It's a pity that there's a powerhouse in the demon race who wants his head. Zhou Xuanji looked terrified, but he was thinking in his heart. A powerhouse in the demon race? Could it be the Gulan demon monarch? Other than that, he could not think of any other powerhouse in the demon race. Young man, don't be afraid. Back then, I had a master as big as you. Do you know what happened to him? Zongyou Dark Emperor laughed, but the broadsword in his hand never fell. You ate him? Zhou Xuanji asked carefully. How did you know? Zongyou Dark Emperor was shocked. He always used this story to scare people, but this time, Zhou Xuanji guessed it in advance. This made him very unhappy. Be good. Kneel down. I will cut you down with my broadsword and let you die without pain. Zongyou Dark Emperor waved his hand at Zhou Xuanji. Zhou Xuanji's skin was soft and tender, so he must taste good. Zhou Xuanji's face turned pale. He stuttered. My king. Why do you want to eat me? I have already told you the truth. Zongyou Dark Emperor laughed proudly. So what? I am going to cut you down. Hurry up and kneel down. If you dare to escape, I will make your life worse than death. Zhou Xuanji laughed coldly in his heart. Stupid bull, I am going to kill you. Stop. At this moment, a loud and righteous cry came. Zhou Xuanji and Zongyou Dark Emperor turned around instinctively and saw a priest in a green robe flying toward them. The priest in a green robe was a little skinny. He had stubble by the side of his mouth, but his eyes were sharp. He held a horsetail whisk in his hand. Zongyou Dark Emperor glanced at him and said with disdain, I was wondering who it was. So it's Zhou Yalong's son, Zhou Zhongdao. If I kill you, will Zhou Yalong come after me? Zhou Zhongdao shouted. Let that kid go. If you have the guts, fight me. Kid. Zhou Xuanji squinted his eyes and cursed in his heart. I am your uncle. It was his first time meeting Zhou Zhongdao. Zhou Yalong had many wives and children. Zhou Zhongdao was the most famous and powerful son. Zhou Yalong thought highly of him. Chapter 96. Zhou Zhongdao moved like an arrow and quickly arrived in front of Zongyou Dark Emperor. He waved the horsetail whisk in his right hand and a white light shot out from it. It turned into a long whip and lashed at Zongyou Dark Emperor's body. Pa! Zongyou Dark Emperor did not dodge. Even though he was hit, his expression did not change. He grinned and sneered. Didn't you drink milk when you were young? Compared to your father, you're too weak. When Zhou Zhongdao heard this, he frowned and continued to wave his right hand. The white whip continued to hit Zongyou Dark Emperor's body. Zhou Xuanji stood on the wind cutter sword and observed the battle quietly. It was indeed an ox demon. High HP, thick skin, and high endurance. Seeing that Zhou Xuanji had not left, Zhou Zhongdao was furious. He cursed loudly. Get out of here. Do you think you can do whatever you want after breaking through to the inner pellet realm? If you don't get lost, you'll die here. When one sees injustice on the road, he will draw his sword to help. What he fears most is meeting a fool. Zhou Xuanji heard him, and his face turned cold immediately. This nephew of mine is a little jumpy and needs to be taught a lesson. At this moment, Zongyou Dark Emperor suddenly grabbed the white whip and pulled it, pulling Zhou Zhongdao down from the sky. Bang! Zhou Zhongdao crashed into the small hill under Zongyou Dark Emperor's feet, and it was a head-on collision. Zhou Xuanji felt pain just by looking at it. Who asked you to have such a big mouth? Zongyou Dark Emperor leapt up. Zhou Zhongdao was about to cover his face when he was kicked out of the mountain wall. His body was so tall and sturdy that he weighed at least tens of thousands of pounds. Zhou Zhongdao was stomped on the ground by him, causing the ground to collapse. Blood splattered everywhere, and the sound of bones breaking was incomparably clear. Zhou Xuanji frowned and cursed in his heart. You're so weak and you still dare to act like a hero. Although his father and grandmother were Zhou Xuanji's enemies, this boy dared to stand up for them, which meant that he was not a bad person. Zhou Xuanji could clearly distinguish between kindness and hatred, so he decided to save him. Kid, you don't have your father's ability, but you do have your father's courage. If you die here today, Zhou Yalong won't even know. You asked for it. Zongyou Dark Emperor raised his saber high and laughed ferociously. His laughter was extremely arrogant and even a little excited. He had met Zhou Yalong before, but he was no match for him. How could he not be excited now that he could kill the son of the future emperor of Great Zhou? Shill! An air-piercing sound could be heard. Zongyou Dark Emperor's eyes narrowed. He waved the blade in his right hand and sent the bloodbath sword flying. He turned around and looked at Zhou Xuanji, who was standing on the wind-cutter sword. "Brat, you dare to attack me?" he roared. He slashed out with his saber, and a black saber chi swept out. It was 100 feet long, like a black crescent moon, and was extremely powerful. Zhou Xuanji immediately dodged with the 8-step sword lunge. He reappeared behind Zongyou Dark Emperor. The sky-sundering Emperor sword appeared in his hand, and he directly used the power of the ancient sword Emperor. The method to use it was very simple. One just had to pour one's dermic powers into the blade, then withdraw it and pour it in again. After repeating this 3 times, one would be able to unleash the power of the ancient sword Emperor. Rumble, Zhou Xuanji felt a horrifying power explode in his body, and a visible aura flame appeared around his body. The ground beneath his feet cracked, and pieces of rocks and grass flew into the air. He raised his sword and slashed forward. This sword was like a hidden dragon emerging from the abyss. The rainbow pierced through the sun, and the power poured out. It felt so good that it could explode. Zongyou Dark Emperor subconsciously swung his blade to block. Clang! The blade and the sword clashed, and Zongyou Dark Emperor was sent flying. It was a majestic sight to see his gigantic body flying up. Zhou Zhongdao, who was lying on the ground, was dumbfounded. His eyeballs almost popped out of their sockets. How can it be? Zhou Zhongdao could not believe his eyes, but the pain in his body told him that everything was real. Zongyou Dark Emperor flew out nearly 100 meters. After he landed, he slid back a dozen meters, kicking up a trail of dust. He looked up at Zhou Xuanji in astonishment. "Who are you?" he roared furiously with gritted teeth. Zhou Xuanji held the sky-sundering Emperor sword in his right hand and the thunderclap sword in his left. The wind-cutter sword and bloodbath sword levitated above his shoulders, and the tips of the swords pointed at Zongyou Dark Emperor. His expression was cold, but his heart was filled with excitement. So powerful! At this moment, he felt boundless power. No matter who stood in front of him, he could defeat them all. He walked toward Zongyou Dark Emperor and burst out in laughter. "Aren't you looking for Sword God Zhou?" Zhou Xuanji said with a mocking smile, which stunned Zongyou Dark Emperor. Zhou Zhongdao, who just got up, was also stunned. He had heard of the name of Sword God Zhou. These 2 years, the most famous person in Great Zhou was Sword God Zhou. So it's him. Zhou Zhongdao was stunned. He was ashamed in his heart and wanted to find a hole to hide in. How dare he call the famous Sword God Zhou a kid? He immediately understood that Sword God Zhou must have wanted to tease Zongyou Dark Emperor, but he interrupted him. It was too embarrassing. At the same time, he was a little touched. Even so, Sword God Zhou did not hold a grudge and helped him when he was in danger. "Sword God Zhou!" Zongyou Dark Emperor roared. His eyes were filled with murderous intent. He dashed toward Zhou Xuanji with all his might. Zhou Xuanji also dashed toward Zongyou Dark Emperor with the 8-step sword lunge. 10,000 Sword Dragon Incantation. Dual Swords Mode. 2 dragon roars could be heard. The sky-sundering Emperor sword and the thunderclap sword were surrounded by a dragon-shaped sword chi. The 2 swords slashed toward Zongyou Dark Emperor. The muscles on Zongyou Dark Emperor's arms bulged. He was about to smash Zhou Xuanji into a meat patty. Clang! Zongyou Dark Emperor was sent flying away again. The violent force made him feel an excruciating pain between his thumb and forefinger, and his face twisted. This guy's strength. Zongyou Dark Emperor was shocked. No wonder the Gulan demon monarch wanted to kill Sword God Zhou so badly. Everyone was in awe of Sword God Zhou's sword techniques, but they did not know that his body was also very strong. Dual cultivation of essence and body. Zhou Xuanji quickly charged over. This time, he directly used the Soul Eater slash. Lightning intertwined on the 2 swords, and the aura flame on Zhou Xuanji's body grew tremendously. He slashed out with both swords, and a violent gale swept out, causing the ground to crumble. 5 streams of black sword chi shot out vertically. At first glance, it looked like a demonic claw had appeared out of thin air. In front of it, even Zhongyao Dark Emperor seemed small. Zhongyao Dark Emperor's expression changed drastically, and he subconsciously raised his blade to block. There was a loud bang. His entire body was covered in blood, and he was sent flying. His huge body was like a rolling stone, crashing into rocks and trees along the way. He flew a full 800 meters away. He gripped his saber with both hands and stabbed it into the ground, barely stabilizing his body. Puff! He spat out a mouthful of blood on the ground, his whole body trembling. His robe had many cuts, and his body was covered in cuts. What sword technique is this? Those 2 swords are demonic swords? Zhongyao Dark Emperor thought in shock. He heard that sword god Zhou had many swords, and each of them was a legendary sword. He immediately got up and transformed into his original form. He turned around and fled. The great saber shrunk and entered his ear. In his original form, although his body was still huge, his speed was really fast. He covered 200 meters in 3 steps, leaving deep hoof prints on the ground. Demon! Where are you going? With a loud cry, Zhou Xuanji flew on his sword and chased after them. Zhou Zhongdao stood up with difficulty. He looked at Zhou Xuanji's back with admiration. Zhongyao Dark Emperor was like a stray dog before him. Damn! Zhongyao Dark Emperor gritted his teeth and tensed his limbs. He ran with all his might, which created a strong gust of wind. At first glance, it looked like a layer of qi enveloped him. Unstoppable! At this moment, anyone who appeared in front of him would be frightened by his aura. Along the way, many cultivators who wandered the world were so frightened that they ran away in panic. Zhou Xuanji followed closely behind him. The man and the demon were as fast as the wind. Sword God Zhou! Do you really want to kill us all? Zhongyao Dark Emperor roared furiously as he sprinted. All the cultivators within a radius of 10,000 meters were stunned. Sword God Zhou? Why should I be merciful when I slay demons? Zhou Xuanji's voice resounded across the heavens and earth. It was so cold and filled with a murderous aura. Zhongyao Dark Emperor cursed in his heart. Such a hypocrite. Chapter 97. Although he had the power of the ancient Sword Emperor, Zhou Xuanji's speed could not catch up to Zhongyao Dark Emperor. Zhongyao Dark Emperor ran with all his might. The man and the demon crossed over the mountains and forests. Their speed was in a stalemate. He's heavily injured. I don't believe he won't stop. Zhou Xuanji's eyes were cold as he thought. Zhongyao Dark Emperor wanted to kill him, so he naturally couldn't let him go. At the same time, he wanted to make a big deal out of this matter so that the powerful figure of the demon race would not dare to act recklessly again. Along the way, he madly attacked for hundreds of miles. Zhongyao Dark Emperor's speed began to decrease, and the distance between him and Zhou Xuanji shortened. Shill! Bloodbath sword suddenly flew over and stabbed Zhongyao Dark Emperor's back. Zhongyao Dark Emperor roared in pain. He was pleased with himself. How can you hurt my skin and flesh? The next second, his expression became one of horror, because he could feel the bloodbath sword sucking his blood. He was so frightened that his ox body trembled and forced the bloodbath sword out of his body. The bloodbath sword quickly flew into Zhou Xuanji's body. In an instant, Zhou Xuanji felt that his stamina had recovered to its peak. As expected of an ox demon. It felt so good to have so much health. Zhou Xuanji's eyes sparkled. Next, he tossed out the bloodbath sword continuously. Zhongyao Dark Emperor began to dodge, but every 3 times he dodged, he would hit once. After all, he could not look back, for fear that his speed would slow down. Just like that, Zhongyao Dark Emperor's HP decreased. However, he did not despair. Because there was a Yao Kingdom up ahead. As long as he entered the Yao Kingdom, he would have a chance of survival. He cursed in his heart. The Gulan demon monarch tricked me. He even said that Sword God Zhou did not live up to his name. Your mother is trying to cover up your son's shame. He immediately hated the Gulan demon monarch. He hated him even more than Zhou Xuanji. Zhou Xuanji also noticed the waves of demonic qi coming from ahead. He had heard Zhao Tsongjian mention that there was a demon kingdom nearby, with hundreds of thousands of demon soldiers. The strongest demon had reached the 5th level of cultivation, which was comparable to the human race at the Spirit Spring stage. He did not stop and continued to move forward. A fifth-rank demon king was no longer a threat to him. Rumble, Zongyo Dark Emperor rushed into the forest with an unstoppable force, knocking down trees one after another. Dust flew everywhere. Looking down from the sky, it seemed like the forest was going to be split into two. Xueqi flew above the forest. He asked in his heart, "Sword Spirit, how long can the power of the ancient Sword Emperor last?" Although Zongyo Dark Emperor was severely injured, he would not be able to kill him without the power of the ancient Sword Emperor. Based on the extent of the Sword Master's execution of the sword technique, it can at least last for half an incense stick's time. The Sword Spirit's words put Xueqi at ease. Looking at Zongyo Dark Emperor's speed, it would probably slow down soon. He gripped the sky-sundering Emperor sword tightly and prepared to use the ranged sword propelling technique. The Bloodbath sword and the Thunderclap sword flew over, forcing Zongyo Dark Emperor to dodge to the left and right. 5 kilometers away, on a wasteland, there was a city with mountains on both sides. Above the city gate, there were countless spears made of white bones and 3 huge beast heads. Many demon soldiers were fighting on the city wall. At this moment, there were dozens of demon soldiers escorting 4 prisoner carriages towards the city gate. There were 70 to 80 prisoners in these carriages. All of them were curled up in fear. "I can finally have a good meal today. Ha ha ha, I've taken a fancy to that girl. When the time comes, let's have some fun together before eating." Recently, many people have left the border of Great Zhou. I wonder what happened. No matter what, it's a good thing for us. These people are all cultivators. They taste good. The demon soldiers chatted and laughed. Their words made the prisoners feel even more hopeless. Boom! The wilderness suddenly shook, startling everyone, including the demon soldiers, to turn their heads to look. So did the demon soldiers on the city wall. They saw a muscular black bull with a shoulder height of 15 meters galloping toward them. That imposing manner seemed to be able to break through all obstacles in front of it. "I am Zongyo Dark Emperor. Open the city gate for me." Zongyo Dark Emperor shouted anxiously. At this moment, he was covered in blood, and blood splattered everywhere along the way. All the demon soldiers were stunned. Among the demon race, Zongyo Dark Emperor was quite famous. Any older demon would have heard of him. At this moment, they noticed that someone was following Zongyo Dark Emperor. It was Xueqi. 10 people stood on a tall mountain to the left of the demon kingdom. They were all dressed in black, and the leader was a middle-aged man with long white hair. He had 2 swords on his back. "Zongyo Dark Emperor? Why is he here? Who's chasing after him?" the middle-aged man asked in astonishment. He frowned. The man in black beside him shuddered and cried out. "He has 4 swords. Could it be Sword God Zhou?" Sword God Zhou. Everyone's expression changed drastically. Not only him, but the demon soldiers also guessed that it was Sword God Zhou. The most famous sword cultivator in Great Zhou was Sword God Zhou. If it was the Sword Monarch, Zongyo Dark Emperor would already be dead. Xueqi could already see the walls of the demon kingdom. At this moment, Zongyo Dark Emperor's speed was much slower than before. Just when Zongyo Dark Emperor dodged the Thunderclap sword, Xueqi threw out the sky-sundering Emperor sword. Ranged sword propelling. The amethyst legendary sword exploded with horrifying speed. PSHHH. Ah! Zongyo Dark Emperor opened his eyes so wide that his eyeballs almost popped out. The excruciating pain made him bite his tongue. In that instant, he almost fainted. His 2 front hooves knocked into each other, and he fell to the ground. Xueqi was stunned and looked a little embarrassed. Because the sky-sundering Emperor sword pierced the bottom of Zongyo Dark Emperor's tail. Blood spurted out, and even he felt a chill in his back. Miscalculation. This will tarnish the reputation of Sword God Zhou. Xueqi felt awkward in his heart, but he looked expressionless on the surface. He quickly flew to Zongyo Dark Emperor. Zongyo Dark Emperor's head was on the ground. His hind legs were stiff, and he raised his butt high. Only by doing so could he alleviate his pain. He felt that his body was in turmoil, and it was extremely uncomfortable. It was worse than death. The sky-sundering Emperor sword shone coldly under the sunlight. The entire plain was silent. Seeing Zongyo Dark Emperor's pitiful state, all the demon soldiers were dumbfounded. Even those who were imprisoned were petrified. Zhou Xuanji held the thunderclap sword and slashed down. Soul Eater slash. Lightning surrounded the sword Qi and slashed down on Zhongyou Dark Emperor's head. Blood gushed out from Zhongyou Dark Emperor's neck and splattered on the ground. The lightning ravaged Zhongyou Dark Emperor's body, and his vitality was quickly drained. A dignified demon king had died so miserably. How pitiful! Zhou Xuanji waved his right hand, and the sky-sundering emperor sword flew out of Zhongyou Dark Emperor's body. A stream of blood spurted out, and Zhongyou Dark Emperor's body twitched and fell to the ground. Looking at the disgusting thing on the blade, Zhou Xuanji shook his right hand and flung it away. He then swung his sword at Zhongyou Dark Emperor again. This was his habit. To prevent the enemy from feigning death. After making sure that Zhongyou Dark Emperor was no longer alive, he looked up at the demon kingdom in front of him. When the demon soldiers saw his gaze, they turned around and fled in fear. They did not even care about the prison carriages. Zhou Xuanji flew over on his sword and destroyed the 4 prison carriages with the vibrant raindrop sword. Those who were saved cried tears of joy. They got off the carriage and knelt before Zhou Xuanji, calling out Sword God Zhou's name. Zhou Xuanji ignored them but looked at the demon kingdom in front of him. He flipped his right hand, and the sky-sundering emperor sword spun. The tip of the sword pointed forward. He tossed it forcefully. The sky-sundering emperor sword flew out. Boom! The city gate exploded immediately. The walls on both sides were filled with cracks, and it looked like it would collapse at any moment. This terrifying power made all the humans and demons dumbfounded. What kind of power is this? Chapter 98. The city gate was broken open, and the city walls shook. All the demon soldiers on top leaped down in panic. No one dared to stop Zhou Xuanji. Zhongyou Dark Emperor's tragic death was right in front of them. Who dared to go against Sword God Zhou? Zhou Xuanji stepped on the Wind-Cutter sword, with the sky-sundering emperor sword and thunderclap sword in his hands and the bloodbath sword above his head, and he approached the demon kingdom. Roar! A deafening roar came from the demon kingdom. The roar shook the mountains on both sides, and rocks fell down. A muscular figure leaped up and flew over the city walls before landing on the ground. His legs crushed the grass beneath him. It was a demon king with a lion's head and a human body. He wore a tiger skin robe with scale armor inside. His mane was majestic and domineering, and his mouth was filled with fangs. He looked extremely ferocious. Tianhou Lion King. He was the lord of this demon kingdom. He had cultivated for 1,000 years, and his power was unfathomable. He stared at Zhou Xuanji furiously. His body trembled in rage. Numerous shape-shifted demons flew up from the city and levitated in the air. Each of them held a weapon and looked ahead anxiously. A tense atmosphere before a battle spread across the heavens and the earth. Zhou Xuanji flew to Tianhou Lion King's head and looked down at him coldly. Thump! Tianhou Lion King knelt on the ground with his hands on the ground. Sir! He gritted his teeth and said, "We are not friends with Zhongyou Dark Emperor. Please spare our lives." All the shape-shifted demons were stunned, but no one tried to dissuade him. Sword God Zhou was too powerful after all. Zhou Xuanji said expressionlessly, "Release everyone in the city. If you dare to hide even one person, I will chop off your head immediately and let all your demon descendants die with you." His voice was soft, but the murderous aura in it made Tianhou Lion King shiver. He immediately turned around and shouted with all his might, "Release everyone in the kingdom. Do not delay." He abandoned his dignity as the lord of the demon kingdom at this moment. Zhou Xuanji waited patiently. Those who were saved behind him did not leave but discussed excitedly. He is the unparalleled Sword God Zhou? He's so powerful. Tianhou Lion King did not even dare to fart in front of him. From today onwards, whoever dares to say that Sword God Zhou's fame is greater than his power, I will be the first to beat him up. With this level of strength, he's definitely a top-notch expert. If he were to enter the Great Zhou army, it wouldn't be difficult for him to reach the 2nd or 3rd rank. Oh my god! Is that really Zhongyou Dark Emperor? In front of Sword God Zhou, he died in such a cowardly manner. How big is the difference in their power? Zhou Xuanji, who had his back to them, smiled. It seemed that he had underestimated his fame. Before he even announced his name, these people already recognized him. Sigh. It wasn't good to be too famous. He couldn't even keep a low profile. Just as Zhou Xuanji was feeling melancholic, the 10 men in black on the mountain to the left of the demon kingdom fell into silence. After a long while, the middle-aged man who was the leader said in a deep voice, "There's a change of plan. Sword God Zhou's power far exceeds the mission's threshold. Retreat immediately. From today onwards, we will no longer accept missions from the Empress of Great Zhou." "Damn it! You tricked us." The other 9 black-robed men nodded. They were all here to search for Sword God Zhou's tracks and assassinate him. But when they saw it today, they almost wet their pants. They quickly disappeared into the mountain forest. Zhou Xuanji did not know that he had unintentionally scared off a group of assassins. After half an hour, all the people in the demon kingdom were escorted out. There were 1,800 people in total, and all of them were injured. Apparently, they were tortured before this. When these people knew that Sword God Zhou came to save them, they were all very excited. Some were even crying. There were all sorts of emotions. After they walked to his back, Zhou Xuanji stared at Tianhou Lion King and asked, "That's all?" Tianhou Lion King knelt on the ground and said anxiously, "Really?" His heart was beating like a drum. It should be all gone, right? As the ruler of the demon kingdom, he did not know how many people were imprisoned in the kingdom. "Do you dare to bring me in?" Zhou Xuanji asked calmly. Tianhou Lion King did not dare to reject and immediately led Zhou Xuanji into the demon kingdom. Finally, Zhou Xuanji realized that there was really no one in the demon kingdom, so he left. Tianhou Lion King sent him to the city gate with a very humble attitude. Not long after Zhou Xuanji left, a young man ran over and knelt in front of him. "Sword God!" he cried out indignantly. "Please slaughter this demon kingdom. Take revenge for those who have died." With this, Tianhou Lion King's expression changed drastically and cursed in his heart. At the same time, he became anxious, afraid that Zhou Xuanji would turn around and attack him. Zhou Xuanji stared at the young man and said calmly, "The heavenly law is reincarnation, and the strong prey on the weak. You are already lucky that I saved you today. If you want to take revenge, you have to rely on yourselves. Don't think that they are despicable. When we humans eat livestock, have we ever thought that we are despicable as well? The powerful must strengthen themselves. Never place your hopes on others. Or else, you will encounter the same danger again in the future." After that, he left with his sword. He did not fly too quickly, in case Tianhou Lion King suddenly attacked. The young man was stunned and sighed in the end. Sword God Zhou was right. Instead of being resentful, it was better to become more powerful. He looked up and saw Tianhou Lion King looking at him furiously, as though he wanted to tear him into pieces. The young man was so frightened that he immediately turned around and ran away. Everyone who was saved began to run away from the demon kingdom. Tianhou Lion King looked at Zhou Xuanji's back and mumbled, "The heavenly law is reincarnation, and the strong prey on the weak. I admire you." With such a breadth of mind, it was no wonder that he was famous today. On the other side, Zhou Xuanji stood on the wind-cutter sword and sighed. The power of the ancient sword emperor lasted too short. Such a pity. He mumbled. Slaying demons was the responsibility of human cultivators. It was the same for demons to eat humans. From different standpoints, there was no such thing as absolute justice. If he could destroy this demon kingdom, his reputation would be even greater. Although he was confident that he could face Tianhou Lion King, the hundreds of thousands of demon soldiers were not just for show. If he encountered other powerful enemies during the great battle, he would really be dead. "I will be 15 in half a month. I can look forward to a new legendary sword." Zhou Xuanji collected his thoughts and began his journey back. The sun was shining brightly in the sky, and there were no clouds in 10,000 miles. Jiang Shui, Bei Shao Wangjian, Huang Lianxin, the little black snake, and the 2 dragon eagles stood in a row. Their faces were pale. On the grassy field in front of them, Zhao Zongjian held his sword in his right hand. He knelt on one knee and panted continuously. There were 6 wounds on his chest, and blood was flowing out. His eyes were ferocious as he stared ahead. 10 meters away, a handsome young man dressed in golden robes looked at him with disdain. Undefeatable Zhao Zongjian with 3 sword moves, the one who could climb the ladder of the emperor? What a joke! No wonder you would become Sword God Zhou's slave. You are too weak. the young man in golden robes said with a smile. He held an iron fan in his hand, which was filled with steel needles. Bei Xiao Wangjian said furiously, Han Shenhua, you are ranked first on Great Zhou's hero ranking board. You are dozens of years younger than Zhao Zongjian. How dare you say such a thing? The young man in golden robes was ranked first on Great Zhou's hero ranking board. Han Shenhua, whose name shook Great Zhou. He learned from the sanctum. Meng Tianlang challenged him dozens of times but never won. Han Shenhua laughed with contempt. I'm here for Sword God Zhou. Fortunately, he is not here. If not, you will see him kneeling in front of me and begging for mercy. You will be even more furious. After that, he burst out laughing. He did not take Bei Xiao Wangjian and the others seriously at all. Chapter 99. Seeing Han Shenhua's arrogance, the crowd found it difficult to suppress their anger. Zhao Zongjian clenched his teeth and charged towards Han Shenhua with his sword in hand. However, before he could even touch Han Shenhua, he was sent flying by the fan. Han Shenhua's iron fan was obviously not an ordinary weapon. With a wave, a strong wind howled. Even Jiang Shui, Bei Xiao Wangjian and the others could not help but take out their instruments to defend themselves. Zhao Zongjian, who was already heavily injured, fell to the ground in a sorry state. Blood could not stop spurting out from his mouth. Too weak. Han Shenhua shook his head. His tone changed and he sneered, if Xiao Jinghong was here, he might stand a chance against me. Unfortunately, he has already fallen into the hands of the sword monarch of Great Zhou. You will never have the chance to see him again. No one said anything. They were all thinking about how to deal with him. Han Shenhua curled his lips and thought that it was really boring. He immediately kept his fan and asked, when is Sword God Zhou coming back? After I defeat him, I still have important matters to attend to. I don't want to waste time. Huang Lianxin snorted coldly and said, you speak as if you just happened to pass by. Aren't you just trying to step on our master to climb up? My master is number 1 on the honor roll of Great Zhou, while you are only number 1 on the hero roll. Don't you know how big the difference is? Hearing this, Han Shenhua's face instantly darkened. No matter how high one's ranking on the hero ranking board of Great Zhou was, it was only for the younger generation. On the other hand, the Great Zhou's reputation leaderboard was a competition with the rest of the world. The quality of the two could not be compared at all. Which of the people who shook the Great Zhou dynasty wasn't an expert who dominated an area? Humph! When your master returns, you will understand who is the real. Han Shenhua snorted, his tone laced with killing intent. Although he was ranked first on the Great Zhou hero ranking board, he had never entered the top 10 of the Great Zhou hero ranking board. The top 10 of the honor roll list had all accomplished earth-shattering feats. Although Han Shenhua was strong, he had never achieved much. If they were too strong, he couldn't beat them. He couldn't afford to offend those who were weak and famous. Xiao! Right at this moment, the sound of air being torn apart resounded, and it interrupted Han Shenhua. He subconsciously tilted his head, and the wind-cutter sword swept past his ear. Clang! The wind-cutter sword fell in front of Zhao Zongjian. Seeing this sword, Zhao Zongjian was instantly excited. It was the same for Jiang Shui and the others. What a sharp sword! Han Shenhua was secretly shocked. He immediately guessed who it was. He turned around and saw Zhou Xuanji walking over with his sword in hand. The white dragon golden robe fluttered in the wind. He had an extraordinary aura, like a sword immortal. Zhou Xuanji was expressionless. He looked at Han Shenhua with a murderous aura. You are Sword God Zhou? Han Shenhua asked, his eyes flashing. You're finally here. He immediately introduced himself. I am Zhou Xionging. Zhou Xuanji came up to him with the 8-step sword lunge and slashed with the sky-sundering emperor sword. Damn it! Han Shenhua cursed in his heart. I haven't finished speaking yet. He instinctively swung his iron fan to block. Clang! His right arm was numbed by the impact, and he was sent flying by Zhou Xuanji's slash. Zhou Xuanji said coldly, you dare to bully my sword slave. Even if you are the heavenly emperor, you will be beaten up. With that, divine swords appeared around him out of thin air. Crimson Dragon Sword, Frost Wave Sword, Bloodbath Sword, Tiger Roar Sword, Swine Culling Sword, Golden Rock Sword, Heaven Sound Sword, Hell King Sword, Residual Image Sword, thunderclap sword, formless sword, furious ape sword, chicken slaying sword, water driving sword, falcon sword, magnetic sword, ghost curse sword, book cutter sword. The 18 legendary swords were all pointed at Han Shenhua. He activated the 10,000 sword dragon incantation straightaway. Each legendary sword was surrounded by dragon-shaped sword chi. Just when Han Shenhua steadied himself, the 18 legendary swords charged at him. Even the wind cutter sword in front of Zhao Tsongjian rose from the ground and charged at Han Shenhua. This time, Han Shenhua was surrounded by 19 legendary swords. He was at a disadvantage immediately and was caught unprepared. The Crimson Dragon Sword released its dragon soul and surrounded Han Shenhua. The Thunderclap Sword exploded with lightning, forcing Han Shenhua to dodge to the left and right. The other legendary swords also showed their prowess. Zhou Xuanji looked at them and waved his right hand. The book cutter sword flew back to his hand. Ordinary stone-grade legendary swords were too weak. They could be easily broken by Han Shenhua's iron fan. Han Shenhua's spell was exquisite. He was surrounded by so many legendary swords, but he was not injured. Looking at his posture, it was obvious that he was struggling. How can it be? These swords? Han Shenhua was shocked in his heart. He felt that he was surrounded by 18 sword cultivators with exquisite sword techniques. A few of the swords were of a higher grade than the iron fan in his hand. He became anxious immediately and dared not to let his guard down. Sword God Zhou was really powerful. Together with the 2 swords in Master's hand, he can control 20 swords at the same time? Beixiao Wangjian opened his eyes wide and mumbled to himself. Zhou Xuanji did not usually practice sword techniques, so he did not expect his improvement to be so exaggerated. Jiang Shui was pleasantly surprised, while Huang Lianxin and the little black snake were petrified. Zhao Tsongjian looked at the battle with passionate eyes. He forgot about the pain in his body and only felt excited. Even though he worked hard to cultivate, the gap between him and Zhou Xuanji was still widening. Instead, he was filled with fighting spirit. Only a grandmaster in the sword's way like this was worth following. Zhou Xuanji stored the book cutter sword into the supreme storage and came up to Han Shenhua with one step. He activated 6-path sword shadow. Han Shenhua felt even more pressured. He felt that his opponent was not just one sword god Zhou. It was a group of sword god Zhou. He almost collapsed. How could he fight like this? If his cultivation was not higher than Zhou Xuanji's, he might have been killed in an instant. The sky-sundering Emperor sword, which weighed thousands of kilograms, slashed at him continuously. Every time he faced the sword head-on, his arm would feel numb from the impact. Looking closely, the web between his thumb and forefinger was already bleeding. 10 breaths later, Han Shenhua was injured. 20 breaths later, Han Shenhua's right hand was crippled. He had no choice but to wield the fan with his left hand. He cast all sorts of spells, but he still could not break free from the siege of the legendary swords. 30 breaths later, Han Shenhua's left hand was crippled too. When the iron fan left his hand, Zhou Xuanji and 6-path sword shadow activated the tri-source vein-severing sword together. The sword chi engulfed Han Shenhua. A painful cry came from his mouth and reverberated across the wilderness. His vital channels were severed, and he felt powerless instantly. 18 legendary swords pierced into his body from different directions, turning him into a porcupine. Thump! Han Shenhua knelt before Zhou Xuanji powerlessly. His body was covered in blood. His face was pale, and his eyes were lifeless. He mumbled, "Impossible. Impossible. How could there be such an insane sword cultivator in the world?" In front of the 10,000 sword dragon incantation, he felt so helpless. Zhou Xuanji raised the sky-sundering Emperor sword and pressed its tip against Han Shenhua's forehead to prevent him from falling to the ground. Han Shenhua's forehead was pierced, and blood flowed down the blade. The scene froze. Han Shenhua, who was pierced with 18 legendary swords, knelt before Zhou Xuanji. His forehead was pressed against by the sky-sundering Emperor sword, which made Zhao Tsongjian and the rest breathe rapidly. They knew that Zhou Xuanji was more powerful than Han Shenhua, but they did not expect the gap to be so huge. It must be known that Zhou Xuanji had not activated Hell King possession yet. Too powerful. Zhou Xuanji looked at Han Shenhua with disdain and said, "Do you want to live or die?" The icy murderous aura made Han Shenhua shiver. "I want to live," he said instinctively. He was not even 100 years old, and he was ranked first on Great Zhou's hero ranking board. It was the highlight of his life. How could he die like this? He was not willing. But I want you to die, Zhou Xuanji said calmly. He turned his right hand, and the tip of the sky-sundering emperor sword rotated like an electric drill, which made Han Shenbua's forehead feel excruciating pain. The pain made Han Shenbua more clear-headed. He endured the humiliation and said with gritted teeth, "As long as you spare my life, I am willing to be your slave. I will do whatever you ask me to do." Zhou Xuanji waved his left hand, and a brush, paper, ink, and brush appeared before Han Shenbua. Han Shenbua's pupils contracted suddenly. His smile was bitter and forced. "Write down a condition that can move me, and put your handprint on it," Zhou Xuanji said slowly. It would be a waste for the top rank on Great Zhou's hero ranking board to die like this. Han Shenbua raised his right hand with great difficulty, and it trembled continuously. Half a month later, Zhou Xuanji lay on the grass with a strand of weed in his mouth. Han Shenbua massaged his legs and asked with a flattering expression, "Master this strength, how is it?" His acupoints were sealed by Huang Lianxin, and Zhao Tsongjian cast a spell on him. He could no longer activate his spirit energy, and now, he was like a cripple. To survive, he could only struggle at death's door. Not only did he have to serve Zhou Xuanji, but he also had to listen to other people's orders. Zhou Xuanji nodded slightly and did not speak. He was waiting. Because he was 15 years old today. Zhou Xuanji did not reply, and Han Shenbua could only focus on massaging his legs and shoulders. A while later, Zhou Xuanji sat up suddenly, and Han Shenbua immediately stopped in fear. Analyze that the sword owner has reached 15 years old. Gotcha started. Ding! Congratulations! The sword owner obtained. Chapter 100. Analyze that the sword owner has reached 15 years old. Gotcha started. Ding! Congratulations! The sword owner has obtained gold, Tempest Calmer, silver, living snake sword, 3 age-retaining pills, and a spirit-boosting bangle. Zhou Xuanji looked delighted. It was another 2 legendary swords. One of them was even gold tier. He immediately took out Gale Calmer and living snake sword, one in each hand. A few lines of small words appeared in front of him. Only he could see them. Sword name, Gale Calmer level. Gold, description. Wind attribute divine sword, able to resist storms and calm huge waves. Sword name, living snake sword, level. Silver. Description. A divine sword made from a 10,000-year-old spirit snake. The blade of the sword retains the vitality of the spirit snake and will actively entangle the enemy. Each of them had their own uses, and they all looked pretty good. Zhou Xuanji smiled satisfactorily and looked at the 2 swords in his hands. The blade of the Tempest Calmer was wide and thick. There were many fine patterns on it, as if the wind was blowing on the blade. The hilt was engraved with fish scales, and it was not too heavy to hold. The living snake sword was a white sword. Its blade was like the belly of a snake. It was nearly 2 meters long and shone with white light under the sunlight. Han Shenbua, who was squatting at the side, widened his eyes. He asked cautiously, "Master, do you still have 2 swords?" Back when he had fought Zhou Xuanji, these 2 swords were not among the many legendary swords that Zhou Xuanji had taken out. He subconsciously reached out to touch the living snake sword. At this moment, the living snake sword suddenly twisted and turned into a white snake, winding along his arm. The blade of the sword turned into a snake's mouth, biting Han Shenbua's abdomen. Han Shenbua's face instantly turned pale, and the pain in his abdomen almost made him cry out. He subconsciously held the blade of the living snake sword. His palm was in pain and quickly became bloody. He was so frightened that he let go. Zhou Xuanji's right hand trembled slightly, and the living snake sword shrunk back to its original state. Han Shenbua hurriedly retreated, his forehead covered in cold sweat. What a strange sword. If the sword had moved down a few centimeters. He shuddered and didn't dare to continue thinking about it. Right now, he couldn't use his spiritual energy, so he was like a mortal. Zhou Xuanji threw him a stare and said, "Who asked you to touch me? I almost crippled you. Are you scared?" The living snake sword was very intelligent. Not bad, not bad. When facing an enemy, the living snake sword might be able to give the enemy a fatal blow. Han Shenhua hurriedly knelt down and nodded like a woodpecker. He said in fear and trepidation, "I'm afraid. I won't dare to do it again." Zhou Xuanji ignored him. He stood up and stored the living snake sword into the supreme storage. Holding Tempest Calmer in his right hand, he walked to the top of the slope, faced the blazing sun and swung his sword. There was no fancy sword technique, just an ordinary sword. As the blade fell, a strong gust of wind howled and gathered into a tornado that swept forward. Rumble, the entire hillside shook violently, and the nearby forest swayed unsteadily. Jiang Shui, Zhao Tsongjian, and the rest turned around to look. They saw a 1,000-foot-tall tornado appearing behind the hill, sweeping up countless sand, dust, and fallen leaves. It was a spectacular sight. Is that a sword technique? Zhao Tsongjian's eyes lit up. Northern Sword Valiant patted his shoulder and said, "Brother Zhao, stop looking. Stay calm." Zhao Tsongjian woke up with a start. He was drenched in cold sweat and quickly turned his head. "I can't think about it anymore. I need to learn the current sword technique first." Zhou Xuanji stored his sword, and the 100-foot-tall tornado dissipated. The dust was still flying, and it looked like a sandstorm. He turned around and walked down the hill. Han Shenhua came back to his senses from the shock. He quickly got up and walked to Zhou Xuanji's side. "Master, is there anything else you need me to do?" he asked carefully. Compared to his arrogant self half a month ago, he was like a completely different person. Zhou Xuanji waved his hand and said, "Go help the three-eyed drought rodent catch some insects, and help the hegemon-scaled black dragon take a bath." Han Shenhua heard him and his expression changed drastically. He wanted to say something but stopped. Zhou Xuanji ignored him and walked straight to Jiang Shui. As he walked, he took out the spirit-boosting bangle. The bangle was like a metal hoop. It would absorb the surrounding spiritual qi automatically and maintain a full state. Once he entered a battle, it would help him replenish his spirit energy. It was a good support enchanted artifact. He wore it on his right wrist and took out an age-halting pill. Age-halting pill, as the name suggested, could make one look young forever. This pill was a perfect birthday present for Jiang Shui. After getting the age-halting pill, Jiang Shui really liked it and even kissed Zhou Xuanji in front of everyone. Huang Lianxin was envious. Which woman doesn't want to stay young forever? Zhou Xuanji noticed her expression. He did not give her the age-halting pill immediately but promised to give it to her in the future. It was all for Huang Lianxin to work hard in her cultivation and help him out. After that, he came to Zhao Tsongjian's side and said, "Do you know where the sword monarch of Great Zhou is?" When Zhao Tsongjian heard this, he immediately sheathed his sword and asked, "Master, are you thinking of?" He challenged the sword monarch of Great Zhou and seized the sword noble. He immediately became excited. This was the Zhou Xuanji he knew. No matter who it was, they dared to fight. Zhou Xuanji nodded and said, "Within a year, we will go to the sword monarch of Great Zhou to ask for him." Zhao Tsongjian asked curiously, "Why a year? Not now." In his opinion, a year's time was not enough to make him much stronger. At least, it could not make up for the gap between him and the sword monarch. Zhou Xuanji smiled mysteriously. "Since the sword monarch wants Jinghong, then let Jinghong learn from him for a year. When he comes back, he will teach Jinghong to us." Having heard this, Zhao Tsongjian's eyes glowed. Good idea. He did not know where the sword monarch of Great Zhou was, so he promised that in the next year, he would find an opportunity to ask around and find the route. At the same time, the news about sword god Zhou killing Zongyou Dark Emperor was finally released. Within half a month, those who were saved spread the news after they returned. At first, not many believed it, but as more and more people spread the news, it spread like wildfire across Great Zhou. How powerful was Zongyou Dark Emperor? A 6th-rank peak Great Demon King. It was equivalent to the pinnacle of Astral Infant, half a step into astral projection. Such a powerful being was killed so easily by sword god Zhou? After Zhou Yalong's son, Zhou Zhongdao, returned to the Great Zhou royal city, he told everyone about it personally, which made the news even more popular. The whole world knew about it. Great Zhou royal city. In the Crown Prince's residence. Clank. The Crown Prince, Zhou Tianyu, flipped the table violently. "Is this true?" he asked with gritted teeth. The soldier kneeling at the door replied with a deep voice. It should be true. Zhou Zhongdao also testified many times in the city. He claimed that Sword God Zhou was a grandmaster with an extraordinary demeanor. Sword God Zhou was his goal in the future. Zhou Tianyu heard and became even more furious. He cursed. That brat really brought shame to the royal family of Great Zhou. The person he hated the most was the second prince, Zhou Yalong. He did not have a good impression of his son. Your Highness, there is news that Sword God Zhou will go to the Sword Monarch's pinnacle personally in a year to ask for Sword Noble Xiao Jinghong. The soldier continued. At this point, his expression became strange. Sword God Zhou and the Sword Monarch were definitely the two pinnacles of the Sword's Way in Great Zhou. One appeared out of nowhere and dominated Great Zhou's reputation ranking. The other was well known for protecting Great Zhou and was recognized as the monarch of the Sword's Way. Ever since Sword God Zhou topped Great Zhou's reputation ranking, countless people were looking forward to the battle between him and the Sword Monarch. They did not expect this day to come. Zhou Tianyu's expression changed slightly and asked, "Is he really going to challenge the Sword Monarch?" If it was true, he would become Sword God Zhou's disciple. At that time, how would the emperor view him? But he thought about it again. If Sword God Zhou dared to challenge the Sword Monarch, he would definitely die. If Sword God Zhou was dead, would he still need to take him as his master? Chapter 101. Zhao Tsongjian flew back on his sword and landed in front of Zhou Xuanji. He knelt down on one knee and cupped his fist. "Master, the news has been sent out." Zhou Xuanji, who was internalizing qi, nodded slightly. Zhao Tsongjian asked doubtfully, why did this matter have to be spread out in advance? If he lost to the Sword Monarch of Great Zhou, wouldn't he become a joke to the world? He didn't dare to say this out loud. Zhou Xuanji understood what he meant, so he opened his eyes and replied, "My identity, have you forgotten? The Empress of Great Zhou will definitely try her best to find trouble with me. The bigger this matter is, the more people it will attract. The Empress of Great Zhou is in the wrong. If she dares to deal with me in front of everyone, she probably doesn't want to keep her position anymore. At the same time, she can also attract Emperor Yan of Zhou's attention." Zhao Tsongjian frowned. He understood a little, but felt that it was inappropriate. Zhou Xuanji let out a long breath and said, "To put it bluntly, I want everyone in the world to be my backer." The reason why the Great Zhou dynasty was able to establish itself in the Great Zhou dynasty was inseparable from those sects and families. What would the cultivation world think if the Empress of the Great Zhou dynasty attacked him? Doing so would chill the hearts of countless people. Of course, the Empress could also reveal Zhou Xuanji's identity, but it would be more difficult to do that. As the Empress, she actually dared to attack and kill a prince. She would become the laughing stock of the entire northern wilderness region. Zhao Tsongjian finally understood and said in admiration, "Good plan. In this way, if Master reveals his true identity in the future, he might really have the power to fight for the position of Crown Prince." The title of number 1 on the Great Zhou honor roll was extremely valuable. This proved that within Great Zhou, the name of Sword God Zhou had reached a stage where everyone knew about him. Zhou Xuanji shook his head and said, "I'm not interested in becoming the emperor." Being the emperor might seem impressive, but in reality, it was extremely troublesome. How could he be as carefree as he was now? As for power, Zhou Xuanji always had a plan. These sword slaves were the power he wanted. If they were to be nurtured into world-renowned experts who could fight against thousands of troops, wouldn't that be a form of authority? To be in charge of someone else's money was a small power. Controlling people's lives was a great power. Controlling the lives of the people in the world was the power of the world. Zhao Tsongjian looked at Zhou Xuanji with admiration. As a prince, Zhou Xuanji had such talent. The throne was not far from him, but he could still reject it. This was the magnanimity that a Sword Dao Grandmaster should have. 3 months later, Zhou Xuanji broke through to Inner Pellet Level 4. He had to admit that the spirit assisting bangle was quite powerful. It could even help him in his cultivation. On this day, Zhao Tsongjian came back to report the news. "Master, I'm afraid the Great Zhou dynasty will be in danger soon," Zhao Tsongjian said with a solemn expression, causing the others to gather around. Zhou Xuanji opened his eyes and said, "Speak." Zhao Tsongjian immediately told him everything he knew. Recently, the Northern Wilderness region's demonic sect, Xinhao sect, had their eyes on Great Zhou. Xinhao sect colluded with the demonically fire sect in the Great Zhou dynasty and started to attack the dynasties near the Great Zhou dynasty. Not only that, but the demon monarch of Gulan was also on the move. 10 days ago, the southern Snow Kingdom's border was breached. Countless civilians were killed and the kingdom was turned into a living hell. The Great Zhou dynasty had already sent reinforcements. In just one season, the flames of war had been ignited in the Great Zhou dynasty, and the country was in danger. Zhou Xuanji frowned and mumbled, "If the situation becomes critical and Great Zhou falls into chaos, it will not be good for us. The Empress will surely wait for an opportunity to make her move." Emperor Yan of Zhou's gaze was always on the entire Great Zhou. Han Shenhua's expression changed drastically and said, "Xinhao sect? That's one of the top 10 sects in the Northern Wilderness region. It can even shake an empire. With the help of the demon monarch of Gulan, Great Zhou is really in trouble." His teacher was a sanctum, which was located outside of Great Zhou. Naturally, he knew more about the Northern Wilderness region. Jiang Shui asked curiously, "Since Xinhao sect is so powerful, why did they attack Great Zhou? Aren't they afraid that both sides will suffer great losses?" Zhao Tsongjian said, "I heard that the top prodigy of Xinhao sect, Huang Ming, was in isolated cultivation in a valley and was ambushed by Zhou Yalong. In the end, both of them left with severe injuries. Huang Ming bore a grudge and informed Xinhao sect's sect lord, Ta Tianchen. Ta Tianchen was infuriated and declared war against Great Zhou." "So careless," Zhou Xuanji asked with a strange expression. "Isn't this too childish?" But this also showed how important Huang Ming was to Xinhao sect. It also showed Ta Tianchen's character. He would seek revenge for the smallest grievance. Zhao Tsongjian nodded and said solemnly, "Ta Tianchen is not weaker than Emperor Yan of Zhou." Han Shenhua swallowed his saliva and said, "Let's leave Great Zhou." The little black snake nodded, "I agree." Zhou Xuanji fell into deep thought and did not reply. Half a year later, Zhou Xuanji broke through to Inner Pellet Level 5. With this speed, he could break through to Soul Fountain at 18 years old. Zhao Tsongjian only broke through to Inner Pellet when he was 18 years old, but his talent was already comparable to Zhou Yalong's. 3 days later, Zhao Tsongjian returned. His expression was more solemn than half a year ago. Everyone gathered around, wanting to hear more news. Zhao Tsongjian came up to Zhou Xuanji and said with gritted teeth, "Bad news." Zhou Xuanji opened his eyes and asked, "What is it?" "Ta Tianchen's grandson, Ta Qixue, heard about your fame and declared that he wants to challenge you. If you don't go within 3 months, he will massacre the entire southern Snow Kingdom." Now the southern Snow Kingdom is already occupied by Xinhao sect, and the population is less than 10% of what it used to be. "Master, if you go, you will most likely die. If you don't go, the fame that you built will go to waste." As he spoke, Zhao Tsongjian clenched his fists. His face was filled with hatred. Jiang Shui opened her beautiful eyes wide and said, "This Ta Qixue guy, is he sick in the head? Did our Xuanji offend him?" Zhou Xuanji was speechless too. He was sitting at home, but the pot fell from the sky. Han Shenhua reminded him, "Ta Qixue is very talented. When he was at Inner Pellet, he killed someone at Soul Fountain. Now, he might have broken through to Soul Fountain. You better not go." Of course, he did not really care about Zhou Xuanji. It was only because of the blood contract that he had to lower his head. Zhou Xuanji looked at Zhao Tsongjian and asked, "Have you heard of the Hidden Sword sect?" Jiang Shui heard him and shuddered. She covered her chest with her hands. She immediately understood what Zhou Xuanji meant. Zhao Tsongjian frowned and said, "Isn't that a small sect in the southern Snow Kingdom? They are either dead or locked up in the southern Snow Kingdom." Zhou Xuanji stopped talking and began to think. "Master, please reconsider. Xinhao sect is an evil sect. If you defeat Ta Qixue, can you escape?" Huang Lianxin reminded, "Even if you don't go, the world will only criticize you for a while. They will not really blame you. Great Zhou did not do anything. Why should you care?" Beishao Wangjian looked at Zhao Tsongjian and asked, "Yeah, what about Great Zhou? Are they not going to do anything?" Zhao Tsongjian sighed. "Great Zhou is in a terrible situation. Not long ago, Meng Tianlang led his army to the southern Snow Kingdom and was utterly defeated. Even Meng Tianlang was locked up in the southern Snow Kingdom and became a prisoner. If we bear with it, Great Zhou should be able to resolve its crisis in at most a few years. The other empires will not ignore it. If Great Zhou falls, the other empires will follow in its footsteps. Meng Tianlang knelt down too. The group fell into silence. At this moment, Zhou Xuanji looked up suddenly and said, 2 months later, we will depart for the southern Snow Kingdom. With this, everyone's expression changed drastically. Chapter 102. 2 months later. Zhou Xuanji and the others packed their things and headed towards the southern Snow Kingdom. On Ada's back, Jiang Shui asked Zhou Xuanji softly, Xuanji, are you really not going to reconsider? She knew why Zhou Xuanji wanted to go to the southern Snow Kingdom. It was definitely because of Qiu Beili. But in her heart, Zhou Xuanji was more important than Qiu Beili. She did not want Zhou Xuanji to be killed. Zhou Xuanji nodded and said, I don't want to regret. Hearing this, Jiang Shui no longer tried to persuade him. Wait for me outside the southern Snow Kingdom. Zhou Xuanji tilted his head and said. The beauty behind him was the most important person in his life, and he did not want her to follow him into danger. Jiang Shui shook her head and said, No matter where you go, I will accompany you. Even if I have to die, it will be the same in the past, the present, and the future. Zhou Xuanji felt a warmth in his heart, but he said unpleasantly, Are you going to accompany me and be a burden? Jiang Shui glared at him. I'm currently at the 2nd level of the enlightening realm. I'm proficient in all 5 elemental spells and healing spells. I'm the healer that you've always mentioned. If you're injured, I can help you. As she spoke, she pinched Zhou Xuanji's waist and said coquettishly, You dare to look down on me? Zhou Xuanji curled his lip and said, Can you be more gentle? You weren't like this when you were young. It's all because of your pampering. Jiang Shui blushed as she said in a low voice. She would only act like this to Zhou Xuanji. Towards others, she would be very polite and maintain a certain distance. Zhou Xuanji looked ahead with determination in his eyes and said, I still want to dote on you for another 10,000 years. Don't worry, from this trip to southern snow, we will both come back alive. Jiang Shui's heart was filled with sweetness. She rested her chin on his shoulder, hugged his waist, and slowly closed her beautiful eyes. Southern Snow Kingdom. The once prosperous dynasty was filled with smoke, and every city had been reduced to ruins. In the center of the empire, only Monarch City remained standing. The city walls were filled with the figures of demonic cultivators. They were all wearing the same dark yellow robes with 2 large words imprinted on their backs. Xian Hao. In Wangqing, the number of Xinhao sect's demonic cultivators was uncountable. They could be found all over the streets. There were many corpses lying on the streets, and many prisoners were chained to the corners of the walls, unable to move. Qiu Beili and a group of hidden sword sect cultivators were imprisoned on a dilapidated street. The iron chains on their bodies were connected to each other, with long nails piercing into the ground at both ends. Everyone's shoulder blades were pierced through, and their meridians were severed. They were like cripples. Qiu Beili's clothes were tattered, his hair was messy, and his face was covered in scabs. He leaned against the wall and looked at the sky blankly. Even Meng Tianlang was defeated. It won't be long before we are the ones to be beheaded. An old man muttered to himself in despair, causing the others around him to tremble. They had suffered all kinds of torture and humiliation. In the end, they couldn't escape death, so they might as well commit suicide. But who could truly face death? A hidden sword sect female disciple gritted her teeth and said, Ta Qixue has already announced that he wants to challenge Sword God Zhou. As long as Sword God Zhou wins against him, he will let us go. We still have hope. Sword God Zhou will surely come. When the other disciples heard this, their eyes lit up. The hidden sword sect practiced the sword, so everyone in the sect naturally looked up to Sword God Zhou. That's right. Sword God Zhou will definitely come. Sword God Zhou is kind and generous. He will surely not give up on us. He is not even afraid of the Empress of Great Zhou and the Sword Monarch of Great Zhou. Of course, he is not afraid of Ta Qixue. When the Sword God comes, he will surely defeat Ta Qixue. The hidden sword sect disciples were all excited and discussed softly. Bailey's body trembled. When he heard the word Sword God Zhou, he could not help but think of Zhou Xuanji. It was said that Sword God Zhou had a small physique, which was very similar to Zhou Xuanji. But no matter how devilish Zhou Xuanji was, he could not be this devilish, right? In just a short 10 years, he had already reached the stage where the whole world knew about him. It shouldn't be him. That kid was extraordinarily talented. He should be trying to break through to Inner Pellet. How could he kill Qin Chitsuan, Tai Yulong, and Zhongyou Dark Emperor? It's a pity that I cannot see you again in this life. Bailey sighed faintly. In his heart, he had already treated Zhou Xuanji and Jiang Xue as his grandchildren. When he was not cultivating, he would always miss the two kids. Of course, he only missed them and not worried. With the little devil Zhou Xuanji around, Jiang Xue would not be at a disadvantage. At this moment, a group of evil cultivators passed by with a prison cart. The people on both sides of the street looked up and saw a lonely silhouette sitting paralyzed in the prison cart. It was Meng Tianlang. At this moment, Meng Tianlang did not look as majestic as before. His hair was disheveled, his armor was removed, and his black shirt was tattered and stained with blood. He lowered his head, and his eyes were hollow like a dead person. Did you see a dark horse? Your great Zhou's second-ranked genius on the hero ranking board is nothing more than this. On the prison cart, a silhouette sat and laughed wildly. He was Ta Chi Xue. He looked like he was in his early 20s. He was handsome and devilishly handsome. His long hair was coiled under his silver crown, and he wore a luxurious red robe that looked like it was dyed with blood. Looking at him, the people on both sides of the street dared not to say anything. Ta Chi Xue bent his right leg and placed his right hand on his right knee. His posture was lazy, but his smile was a little maniacal. If Sword God Zhou dares to come, he will be my next human pet. I know that all of you are looking forward to Sword God Zhou's arrival. I am looking forward to it too. I can't wait to see him kneeling and begging for mercy. Ha ha ha, Ta Chi Xue said and laughed. He did not take Sword God Zhou seriously at all. Everyone on the street stared at him with red eyes. If looks could kill, Ta Chi Xue would have already been torn into pieces. The troops continued to advance. Ta Chi Xue planned to let all the captives see Meng Tianlong's miserable state. Ming! The dragon eagle's cry resounded through the sky. On Ah Big's back, Zhou Xuanji held the furious ape sword in his left hand. He also transferred his spirit-boosting bangle to his left hand. Even though he had been charging for 10 days, his hand did not feel sore at all. Compared to the last time, his cultivation had risen greatly, so he was naturally more relaxed. Zhao Tsongjian carried the little black snake, Bei Shao Wangjian carried Han Shenhua, and Huang Lianxin rode on her sword alone. The group of people swept past the mountains like immortals. Zhao Tsongjian turned around and said, Master, we are still half a day away from the Southern Snow Kingdom. We will need another 2 days to reach the royal city of the Southern Snow Kingdom. Zhou Xuanji nodded and said, After a while, we will stop and rest for a while before heading toward the Southern Snow Royal City at full speed. No one had any objections. 2 hours later, they landed on the plains to rest. As far as the eye could see, they could already see the outline of the Southern Snow Kingdom's border. Zhou Xuanji began to deploy the plan, and the group listened quietly. After he finished, Han Shenhua could not hold it anymore and said, Can you unseal me? I'm completely useless now. The top rank of Great Zhou's hero ranking board was reduced to an ordinary person. Following Zhou Xuanji and the rest like this was suicide. Zhou Xuanji glanced at him and said, If we can survive this battle, I will unseal you. Han Shenhua heard him and his face turned pale, and he broke out in a cold sweat. The little black snake came to his side and straightened his body. Don't even think about it. Do you know how many years of torture I have suffered? You have not even been here for a year. Continue to wait. Chapter 103. The group rested for 2 hours before continuing toward the Southern Snow Kingdom. The Southern Snow Kingdom's border custom was covered with corpses. There were human corpses and demon corpses. Blood dyed the ground red. It was hard to imagine how intense the battle must have been. Some demon corpses were as huge as a hill, which was a shocking sight. Even the border custom city wall had dozens of holes. Zhou Xuanji and the group flew past the border custom unobstructed. The tragic scene along the way made their hearts heavy. Only the little black snake was still cheerful. It looked around on small air's back with greedy eyes. The ground was filled with food. Occasionally, there were even living demons foraging for rotten meat. Desolate. Desolate. A murderous atmosphere pervaded the heavens and earth. Zhou Xuanji held the furious ape sword in his left hand and the sky-sundering emperor sword in his right. He held the sword with both hands and looked ahead, ready to fight. Beixiao Wangjian smiled and said, "This might be what Master said. You know there's a tiger on the mountain, but you still want to go there." "Of course. Let's fight together and die together. Our lives will not be in vain." Zhao Zongjian smiled proudly with a heroic spirit. Huang Lianxin stared at him and said, "Don't say such depressing words. With Master around, we can all come out alive." "That's right. We will not die." Jiang Shui waved her fist and said excitedly. The group looked at each other and laughed. The tense atmosphere dissipated immediately. The Southern Snow Royal City. Ta Qixue sat on a tiger-skin chair in front of the palace gate and enjoyed the shoulder massage from two enchanting ladies. He held his wine cup and looked at the square below the stone stairs. Two inner pellet prisoners were fighting to the death. One of them had lost an arm but was still fighting with gritted teeth. Between the two of them, only one could survive. At this moment, an evil cultivator from Xinhao sect came to Ta Qixue's back and said softly, "Young master, Sword God Zhou has entered the Southern Snow Kingdom." Having heard that, Ta Qixue immediately sat up straight. He smiled and said, "Very good. I want to see how powerful this guy, who ranked first on Great Zhou's reputation ranking, is. Pass my order. Do not stop Sword God Zhou." After the evil cultivator received the order, he turned into a wave of demonic qi and disappeared. Ta Qixue was elated. He immediately channeled his spirit energy and shouted, "Sword God Zhou has entered the Southern Snow Kingdom. By then, all of you can come and watch the battle. Watch how I defeat your Sword God Zhou." His voice spread throughout the city, causing all the captives to be moved. On one of the streets, under a tree, Zhang Tianjian and Zhang Ruyu were both excited. The two of them looked like beggars, disheveled and unkempt, with injuries all over their bodies. "Senior Zhou is here. We're saved." Zhang Ruyu spoke incoherently. His body was trembling, and the iron chains were also shaking, making a ringing sound. Zhang Tianjian covered his mouth and whispered, "Lower your voice." The father and son turned around and saw that the other captives were also excited. Although Meng Tianlang was defeated, Sword God Zhou had never been defeated since his birth. Sword God Zhou is finally here. Sword God Zhou is indeed benevolent. But Xinhao sect sent so many evil cultivators. Even if he wins, can he escape? Indeed. Sword God Zhou shouldn't have come. Even if he loses, I have no regrets. There are so many heroes in Great Zhou. How many of them would dare to come and save us? God bless, Sword God Zhou, you must win. The captives were discussing on every street in the king's city. In a dungeon, Meng Tianlang also heard Ta Qixue's voice. He looked up slowly with a complicated expression in his eyes. "Sword God Zhou," he sighed. Although he was defeated by Zhou Xuanji last time, he had seen through Zhou Xuanji's power. Beside Ta Qixue was someone who surpassed the astral infant stage. If Sword God Zhou came, he would most likely end up like him. Now, he could only pray that Great Zhou would send a first-rank general as reinforcements. On the way to the Southern Snow King city, there were countless forests, and many people were hiding in them. Most of them were taking refuge. When they saw Zhou Xuanji and his companions flying across the sky fearlessly, they were all astonished. Who were these people? The dragon eagles roar across the sky, the sword god slays the thieves, and the sword king follows. It's Sword God Zhou. And Northern Sword Valiant. Cries of astonishment came from a forest. Not only him, but the others also recognized Zhou Xuanji and his companions. Northern Sword Valiant had been in the Southern Snow Kingdom for decades, and many people had seen him before. Moreover, the two dragon eagles looked so majestic. It was easy to associate them with the world-renowned Sword God Zhou. The arrival of Sword God Zhou excited the people hiding in the forest. Now, in the hearts of all the kingdoms under Great Zhou's banner, Sword God Zhou was a legendary figure. He was a legendary cultivator who could compete with the Sword Monarch for glory. His arrival might really save the Southern Snow Kingdom from its dire situation. Master, the Southern Snow King city is 100 miles ahead. Zhao Zongjian stood on his sword and said with a deep voice. His eyes were filled with fervor. Before the battle began, he could feel his blood boiling. Zhou Xuanji nodded slightly, and the others prepared for battle. Only Han Shenbo was trembling. He cried in his heart, "If my spirit energy was not sealed, why would I be so panicked?" He was the top genius on Great Zhou's hero ranking board. A short while later, Zhou Xuanji could already see the city walls of the Southern Snow Kingdom. He immediately stood up and stepped on Ah Big's head with his left foot. He held his sword with both hands and channeled his spirit energy. "Ta Chi Xue. I, Sword God Zhou, am here." His voice swept across all directions and spread across the entire Southern Snow King city. The entire city was in an uproar. Sword God Zhou really came. Qiu Bailey heard his voice and fell into a daze. Zhou Xuanji's voice was already changing, but he still felt a sense of familiarity. Boom! A horrifying demonic qi exploded from the center of the city like a long black pillar. The thunderclouds gathered and connected the heavens and the earth. It was a majestic sight. Ha ha ha! Sword God Zhou, do you dare to come in and fight me? If you can defeat me, I will let everyone in this city go. Ta Qishue's arrogant laughter came from the city. He sounded extremely excited. As the grandson of Xin Hao Sec's sect lord, he was equally talented. Even Meng Tianlang was not his match in a one-on-one fight. Zhou Xuanji said this and leaped up. "You guys wait here. I will enter the city alone." The wind cutter sword appeared under his feet out of nowhere and flew toward the Southern Snow King city. Jiang Shui was extremely anxious. She held the flaming fan tightly in her right hand. The others were the same. Zhou Xuanji tried to persuade them for a long time. They only agreed after he threatened them. If all of them entered the city, they would be like trapped beasts in a cage. Soon, Zhou Xuanji flew past the city wall. The evil cultivators looked up at him. He doesn't look that powerful? The rumors are true. The swords in his hands are not ordinary. That sword is so majestic. Could it be a level 6 enchanted artifact? TSK. This brat is really seeking death. Take a guess. How long can he live? The evil cultivators discussed among themselves and did not take Zhou Xuanji seriously. To them, Zhou Xuanji was a fool to come alone. If such a fool did not die, who would? Chapter 104. After entering the city, Zhou Xuanji directly flew towards the pillar of demonic qi. The furious ape sword in his left hand was still accumulating power, ready to strike at any time. After entering the city, the captives and demonic cultivators on the streets all raised their heads to look at him. The captives were excited, but the demonic cultivators were disdainful. "Father! It was really Sword God Zhou. He's here." Zhang Ruyu was so excited that he jumped up and down on the spot, ignoring the injuries on his body. Zhang Tianjian looked at Zhou Xuanji and fell into a trance. Back then, if he had taken Zhou Xuanji as a sword slave, perhaps things would have been different. Unfortunately, he could not abandon everything he had at that time. But now, he had lost everything. In retrospect, it was really a joke. The other side. Qiu Bailey widened his eyes and stood up while trembling. Zhou Xuanji did not notice him. His eyes were fixed on the long pillar of demonic qi in front of him. It's really him. He's Sword God Zhou. Qiu Bailey's expression was complicated. His eyes revealed shock, disbelief, surprise, worry, fear, and all sorts of other emotions. He had long since guessed that Zhou Xuanji's name would spread across the world. But he didn't expect this day to come so soon. Now, he could only look up to him from the crowd. However, he was also worried about Zhou Xuanji. This situation was almost a dead end, and he was afraid that something would happen to Zhou Xuanji. In the center of the city, on the square in front of the palace, Ta Qishue stood on a long pillar of demonic qi, wantonly declaring his power. Thousands of Xin Hao Sec's demonic cultivators were spread out at the edge of the square, on top of the high walls and palaces, surrounding the square so tightly that not even a drop of water could trickle through. A scarlet-robed old man stood in front of the palace's entrance. His figure was tall, His hair was white, and his eyes were sunken. He seemed extremely gloomy and cold like a venomous snake. He was an elder of the Xinhao sect. His name was Xueqi, and his abilities were unfathomable. He had watched Ta Qixue grow up. No matter where Ta Qixue went, he would follow him closely. Inner pellet stage level 5? What a joke. Xueqi shook his head and laughed. Young master had been looking forward to it so much, but it turned out that it was just a paper tiger. After Ta Qixue saw Zhou Xuanji, he shook his shoulder, and the long pillar of demonic qi exploded, turning into a black mist that spread across the square. Thud. Zhou Xuanji landed, and the wind-cutter sword levitated above his head. The tip of the sword was pointed at Ta Qixue. Zhou Xuanji's expression did not change even when he was surrounded by thousands of evil cultivators. You are sword god Zhou? He was born with a good body. Didn't they say you're only as tall as a child? Ta Qixue looked at Zhou Xuanji curiously and asked in amazement as he sized him up. Zhou Xuanji replied calmly, "That's because I grew up." Grown up? Were you really a child? Ta Qixue was even more curious. He rubbed his chin and pondered. Zhou Xuanji raised his brow and asked, "If I defeat you, will you really keep your promise?" Ta Qixue smiled and said, "Xinhao sect is not an evil sect without principles. As long as you defeat me, all the captives in the city can leave." He waved his right hand, and two fiendish cultivators leapt out from behind the high wall on the left side of the plaza. They carried a prisoner cart to the ground, and Meng Tianlang was imprisoned inside. Seeing Meng Tianlang's miserable appearance, Zhou Xuanji slightly narrowed his eyes. Meng Tianlang was also stunned and lowered his head in shame. Back then, he had missed his appointment with Zhou Xuanji, and the person he feared seeing the most was Zhou Xuanji. He did not expect Ta Qixue to be so vicious that he actually escorted him out. It was worse than killing him. Do you know him? He's ranked second on Great Zhou's hero ranking board. He brought an army to rescue us, but he's the only one left alive. Don't you think it's funny? Ta Qixue pointed at Meng Tianlang and laughed. His laughter sounded insane, and in Zhou Xuanji's eyes, it sounded like he was sick. Zhou Xuanji raised his right hand and pointed the sky-sundering emperor sword at Ta Qixue. Don't talk so much. If you want to fight, let's fight. He was still holding the furious ape sword in his left hand and had been accumulating energy. He had the confidence to deal with Ta Qixue, but to guard against the powerful cultivators from Xinhao sect, he had never stopped accumulating energy. Ta Qixue heard him and laughed even more wildly. He opened his hands, and two curved blades appeared in his hands. The two blades were filled with an evil qi. The blades were blood red, as though they were just drawn out from a pool of blood. With the blades in his hands, he walked toward Zhou Xuanji. If you lose, you will become my human pet, just like him. Ta Qixue laughed coldly and turned into a ferocious demon in an instant. Demonic qi surrounded his body, and his fiendish aura soared into the sky. As soon as he finished speaking, he dashed forward. In the blink of an eye, he came up to Zhou Xuanji. Zhou Xuanji leaped up and slashed down furiously with the sky-sundering emperor sword in his right hand. The blades clashed, and the horrifying force caused Ta Qixue's arms to tremble a little. Such a heavy sword. Ta Qixue was shocked in his heart. He turned around and slashed horizontally with both blades. Zhou Xuanji flew into the air. He moved his right hand quickly and activated the vibrant raindrop sword. Countless sword stars descended. Ta Qixue swung his blades and deflected all the sword stars. Ding! 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 The sword stars landed on the blades, and there was a sound of metal clashing. Great sword technique. Ta Qixue finally understood that the title of Sword God Zhou was not just for show. At this moment, Zhou Xuanji came to his back with the 8-step sword lunge. 6-path sword shadow. Ta Qixue was surrounded in an instant. He instinctively spun his body, and his blade swept up a bloody gale. Zhou Xuanji and the 6-path sword shadow used the Soul Eater slash together. The black sword qi engulfed Ta Qixue in an instant and soared into the sky like a black tornado. This scene shocked the thousands of evil cultivators. The Xinhao sect's elder, Xueqi, frowned and mumbled, "Such a domineering sword technique. What is this guy's background?" Amethyst legendary sword. And an Earth-grade advanced tier sword technique. The destructive power was so powerful that the ground of the square shook violently. Ta Chi Xue leaped out from the black sword Qi quickly. His robe was torn, and he was covered in blood. After a somersault, he landed steadily and knelt on one knee. He looked up. His face was covered in blood, and his eyes were wide open. He was obviously shocked. "What sword technique is this?" he asked with gritted teeth. He was already injured in the first exchange of blows. Thousands of eyes stared at him, which made him want to find a hole to hide in. Meng Tianlang, who was in the prison carriage, was stunned. The six-path sword shadow dissipated. Zhou Xuanji pointed his sword at Ta Chi Xue and said with an indifferent expression, "Soul Eater / specialized in slaying evil spirits." After that, legendary swords appeared around Zhou Xuanji out of thin air. Crimson Dragon Sword, Frost Wave Sword, Bloodbath Sword, Tiger Roar Sword, Swine Culling Sword, Golden Rock Sword, Heaven Sound Sword, Hell King Sword, Residual Image Sword, Thunderclap Sword, Formless Sword, Chicken Slaying Sword, Water Driving Sword, Falcon Sword, Magnetic Sword, Ghost Curse Sword, Book Cutter Sword, Storm Calmer, Living Snake Sword. All of them pointed their swords at Ta Chi Xue. Zhou Xuanji stepped forward, and the legendary swords followed closely behind. Ta Chi Xue's face was extremely unsightly. He slashed the ground with both of his blades and leaped up with the recoil. A bloody gale blew, and it looked like a gigantic blood-colored bat was entrenched on his body. Zhou Xuanji held his sword in his right hand and thrust it toward the sky. All the legendary swords followed suit. They were all ranged sword propelling. Ta Chi Xue's expression changed drastically in midair. He instinctively crossed his blades in front of him to block. Clang! 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 The legendary swords clashed with his blades consecutively and sent him flying into the sky. In the blink of an eye, he was 90 meters above the ground. Many captives on the street saw this. They looked up and craned their necks. "That's Ta Chi Xue. It's that devil." Such beautiful swords. Could they be Sword God Zhou's treasured swords? So domineering. Sword God Zhou lives up to his name. Doesn't he only have 9 legendary swords? Not only that. Look carefully, there are at least 15 of them. So powerful. Cries of astonishment came from every street, one after another. The legendary swords with different radiances charged at Ta Chi Xue, aiming to pierce him out of the sea of clouds. The scene was shocking. So powerful. Qiu Bailey opened his eyes wide. Although he did not see Zhou Xuanji's silhouette, it was obvious that Ta Chi Xue was at a disadvantage. How powerful is that little demon now? Chapter 105. Damn it! Ta Chi Xue resisted with all his might, but there were too many godly swords. Each of them had their own special abilities, and they consumed his spiritual power crazily, making him suffer. His gaze passed through all of the swords and saw Zhou Xuanji standing on the ground, looking up at him. This scene infuriated him. He was the grandson of Xin Hao Sect's sect leader. How could he be in such a sorry state? He immediately bit his lips, causing blood-colored scales to appear on his cheeks. The demonic aura surrounding his body increased exponentially. There was a loud bang. All of the legendary swords were knocked away by him, and he paused for a moment before rushing towards Zhou Xuanji. It was like a blood-red arrow falling from the sky. His target was Zhou Xuanji. Zhou Xuanji smiled and laughed loudly. "I was wondering how capable you were. Justo, you dare to challenge me? Even a sparrow dares to spy on the height of a swan?" His voice reverberated throughout the southern Frost Royal City, causing everyone to go into an uproar. Sword God Zhou had the upper hand? After he spoke, Zhou Xuanji used the Soul Eater slash again and slashed. The 10,000-kilogram amethyst godly sword contained terrifying power. The surface of the ground crumbled and 3 black sword Qi rushed towards Ta Chi Xue like sharp claws. Ta Chi Xue's dual blades slashed forward. The blades crisscrossed, and the blood-colored bat on his body transformed into a crescent blade Qi that swept out. 2 powerful forces collided with each other, sweeping up countless gravel and shaking the plaza and surrounding high walls. Shill! Shill! Swoosh! The godly swords drew a perfect arc in the sky and charged towards Ta Chi Xue again. Ta Chi Xue's expression changed and he cursed, "Shameless! How were they supposed to fight?" At this moment, He felt the same as Han Shenhua. It felt like he was fighting a group of sword god Zhou. He immediately dodged, narrowly dodging the attacks of the divine swords. Zhou Xuanji let go of the sky-sundering emperor sword and raised his right hand. With the Hell King sword in hand, he entered Hell King possession straightaway. His left arm trembled slightly. Using the Nether King's possession while accumulating power was a bit too much. Of course it was just barely. He leaped up and transformed into the King of Hell, charging towards Ta Chi Xue. All the divine swords followed closely behind. Their light gathered together and condensed into a seven-colored glow that illuminated the heavens. Zhou Xuanji immediately entered the Soul Eater/his sword will mode, and his aura grew tremendously. Ta Chi Xue opened his eyes wide. In his eyes, Zhou Xuanji was like a sheep that turned into a ferocious tiger. Zhou Xuanji's viciousness made him shudder. Zhou Xuanji leaped into the air even higher than him and charged toward him. Little brat from the devil cult. This sword. I'll make you understand why you've lost. Zhou Xuanji gave a loud cry and ferociously stepped on the thunderclap sword with his right foot. Lightning surrounded his body as he used the 8-step sword lunge. The lightning could stimulate his muscle cells, making him much faster than before. Before Ta Chi Xue could react, his chest was penetrated by Zhou Xuanji's Hell King sword. Blood splattered everywhere. Ta Chi Xue's hideous expression froze. His pupils twitched violently and his eyes were filled with disbelief. How could there be such a fast sword? How dare you? With a loud cry, Xiahou Gongji charged toward Zhou Xuanji like the wind. One by one, the divine swords flew towards him. The Crimson Dragon Soul, Cold Waves, Lightning, and others were so powerful that they were about to drown him. He was extremely agile and dodged them easily. However, the living snake sword coiled around his ankle and slithered upward like a spirit snake. The sky-sundering emperor sword followed. It weighed thousands of kilograms and was unstoppable. Xiahou Gongji slammed the sky-sundering emperor sword away, but at the same time, his right palm felt slightly numb. At the same time, the living snake sword was about to bite his neck. He grabbed it with his left hand and flung it away. Stop! Zhou Xuanji's loud cry came and stopped Xiahou Gongji in shock. The thousands of evil cultivators nearby took out their enchanted artifacts and prepared for battle. They saw Zhou Xuanji standing in the ruins with his right foot on Ta Chi Xue's chest. The Hell King sword was still stuck in Ta Chi Xue's chest, and blood flowed down the blade. His right hand was pressing on the Hell King sword's hilt. If Xiahou Gongji dared to come near, he would surely kill Ta Chi Xue on the spot. Silence. The entire place was silent. All the evil cultivators were in disbelief. Brat, do you know what will happen to you if you kill him? Even Great Zhou cannot protect you. Xiahou Gongji squinted his eyes and threatened with a cold voice. Zhou Xuanji looked at him sideways and said, he lost. Release all the captives in the city. For every captive missing, I will chop off one of his arms. Xiahou Gongji heard him and his face turned dark immediately. Meng Tianlang, who was in the prison carriage, was dumbfounded. Zhou Xuanji really won. And he won in such a dominating manner. Ta Chi Xue, who was standing under Zhou Xuanji's feet, looked at the sky with a blank expression. He could not believe that he was defeated. And he was utterly defeated. How could it be? His cultivation only seemed to be at the inner pellet stage. That slash just now. At this moment, Ta Chi Xue's pride and self-esteem were all shattered. Zhou Xuanji immediately cried out, Ta Chi Xue lost. Release all the captives in the city, or else I will chop off his head. With his spirit energy fully channeled, his voice traveled across the entire city. Boom! The entire city was in an uproar. Sword God Zhou won? So fast. Mighty. This is the unparalleled Sword God Zhou. Invincible. Too powerful. How long has it been? I told you. Ta Chi Xue is just a clown. He can't even withstand a single blow from a truly powerful cultivator. It seems that Meng Tianlang is not just a little bit weaker than Sword God Zhou. He still went back on his words. From today onwards, Sword God Zhou is my faith. All the captives were excited. The sound of metal chains shaking could be heard in every street. The evil cultivators who were guarding the captives were even more stunned. They knew how powerful Ta Chi Xue was. Astral infant stage. And he was defeated so quickly? And under the protection of Elder Xiahou, how could he be threatened by Sword God Zhou? At this moment, Sword God Zhou's image in their hearts grew higher and higher. Zhang Tianjian and Zhang Ruyu's eyes were filled with tears. Father! Sir Sword God Zhou is invincible. He's really invincible. Zhang Ruyu held Zhang Tianjian in his arms and jumped up and down excitedly, like a child. Zhang Tianjian was excited too, but he felt more regret. If only he could become Sword God Zhou's sword slave. What kind of serendipity would that be? On the other side, Qiu Bailey was stunned on the spot. It was as though he was in a different world from the excited captives around him. He really won, Qiu Bailey mumbled to himself. Suddenly, a surreal thought appeared in his mind. Could it be that Zhou Xuanji came for him? It shouldn't be. Maybe he has already forgotten about me. A terrible old man. Qiu Bailey began to worry about his gains and losses. The evil cultivators around him began to hesitate whether to release the captives or not. On the ruins of the square, Zhou Xuanji pressed down with his right hand, and Tachi Xue cried out in pain. Ah! The Hell King sword was a gold-grade legendary sword. It was so sharp that it could cut through his bones easily. Zhou Xuanji looked at Xiahou Gongji and said coldly, "If you don't say something, your young master will suffer a fate worse than death." Zhou Xuanji did not trust the evil cultivators. Ta Qishue's words were reserved. If he won, he would release all the captives in the city. Even if he took it seriously, he did not say that he would let Zhou Xuanji go. Xiahou Gongji's eyes were filled with blood. His murderous aura soared into the sky. "Release the captives!" He roared furiously with a deep voice. His voice resounded across the entire city. All the Xinhao sect's evil cultivators cut off their chains and released the captives. Chapter 106. Outside the southern snow royal city, Huang Lianxin said excitedly, "Master One!" Jiang Shui, Zhao Congjian, and Beishao Wangjian were also very excited. Han Shenbo was a little dazed. Facing a group of powerful cultivators from Xinhao sect, could Zhou Xuanji still capture Ta Qishue? There was no justice in this world. The little black snake coiled on a large rock and said with a complacent smile, "I've said it before, this kid isn't a fish in the pond. He's a true dragon and won't die here. You guys just don't believe me. Weren't you scared to death just now?" Jiang Shui snapped. The little black snake was even more pleased with himself. "That was just to scare you. Your psychological endurance is really bad." Beishao Wangjian could not stand it anymore. He rushed over and gave it a kick, but it nimbly dodged it. "I'm no longer the earthworm from back then. You want to kick me?" The little black snake raised its head and said arrogantly. Huang Lianxin said, "Let's starve it for 10 days. Jiang Shui, "Not enough 20 days. Zhao Congjian, 1 month, round it up." The little black snake was speechless. Han Shenbo sighed and sat on the ground. It seemed that it would be difficult for him to escape from Zhou Xuanji's clutches. At this time, captives were fleeing from Royal City in a panic. And Zhou Xuanji was still facing off against Xiahou Gongji. He removed the possession of the Netherworld King, his left arm trembling non-stop. Xiahou Gongji noticed this scene. "Kid, looks like you used some kind of secret technique and can't hold on much longer, right?" Xiahou Gongji sneered. His smile was extremely cruel. Meng Tianlang, who was in the prison cart, shuddered. It was that sword. He thought back to the terror of battling Zhou Xuanji years ago. Zhou Xuanji pointed the furious ape sword at Meng Tianlang and said, "And him. Let him go too." Xiahou Gongji immediately waved his hand. The 2 fiendish cultivators in front of the prisoner carriage opened the door and removed the chains on Meng Tianlang's body. To prevent Ta Qishue from exploding, the bloodbath sword had already pierced into his palm and was absorbing his blood to help Zhou Xuanji recover his stamina. Zhou Xuanji's gaze never left Xiahou Gongji. This was because this person's cultivation had surpassed the nascent soul realm. If he was slightly distracted, he would definitely be killed by Xiahou Gongji with lightning speed. He looked calm, but he was actually extremely nervous. Do not panic. The more critical the moment, the calmer he had to be. At the very least, he had to look confident. Zhou Xuanji smiled, as though he had Xiahou Gongji in his grasp. Xiahou Gongji frowned and thought to himself, could it be that this brat still has a trump card? Meng Tianlang walked forward with difficulty. When he reached the gate, he looked back at Zhou Xuanji. Zhou Xuanji looked so domineering when he stomped on Qi Xue, which made people feel fascinated. He murmured, "Thank you. If you can leave this place alive, I will become your slave." With that, he turned around and walked through the door, his figure quickly disappearing. "Let me go. If you kill me, don't even think about leaving." Ta Qi Xue gritted his teeth. He could feel that the bloodbath sword was sucking his blood. If this continued, he would die of blood exhaustion. Zhou Xuanji did not look at him but stared at Xiahou Gongji and said, "If you are obedient, I will not kill you." Ta Qi Xue was so angry that his chest felt stuffy, causing blood to gush out of his wound even faster. Divine swords floated around the two of them. As long as Xiahou Gong dared to get close, the divine swords would fall and turn Ta Qi Xue into a sieve. Time ticked by. Zhou Xuanji's left arm trembled even more violently. The battle just now messed up his rhythm of charging up energy. His blood flow was not smooth, and his internal organs felt uncomfortable. Half an hour later, Xiahou Gongji could not help but persuade him again. "If you give up now, Xinhao sect can recruit you. With your talent, no matter where you go, you will be treated well." Zhou Xuanji said expressionlessly, "I will only follow my sword. If you join Xinhao sect, you can lead hundreds of thousands of demonic disciples. I only want to lead my sword. If you join Xinhao sect, you can learn supreme energy techniques. I only want to learn sword techniques that are suitable for my sword. Other than swords, what else do you know?" Xiahou Gongji almost lost his composure. Why is this kid so stubborn? Does he really want to fight to the death with Xinhao sect? Zhou Xuanji calculated the time silently. The king's city was huge, and the injured captives needed time to escape. He did not expect everyone to escape, but he wanted to save as many as he could. Another half an hour passed. Zhou Xuanji's left arm trembled violently. He knew that he could not wait any longer. He immediately lifted Ta Qi Xue up with his sword, and Ta Qi Xue howled in pain. "What are you trying to do?" Xiahou Gongji cried out with a deep voice. Tens of thousands of evil cultivators gathered around him and were ready to pounce on Zhou Xuanji at any time. "After I leave the city, I will let him go," Zhou Xuanji said calmly. After that, he leaped up lightly, and the wind-cutter sword landed under his feet. He flew out of the king's city. Xiahou Gongji chased after him, and tens of thousands of evil cultivators followed closely behind. Zhou Xuanji did not fly too fast. He scanned the streets below him while keeping an eye on Xiahou Gongji, who was behind him. At a glance, other than the corpses in the southern Snow King's city, the captives had all escaped. Maybe there were still people hiding in the dark, but Zhou Xuanji could not care so much. After half a cup of tea's time, Zhou Xuanji came to the city wall with Ta Qi Xue. "Enough. If you go any further, I will kill you at all costs," Xiahou Gongji cried out with a deep voice. They were Xinhao sect, and they were threatened by someone. Wouldn't they become a laughingstock if word got out? Far away, Jiang Shui, Zhao Tsongjian, and the rest also noticed Zhou Xuanji's silhouette, and they became even more anxious. "Let's not get close, lest we drag our master down," Zhao Tsongjian reminded. Even if they attacked together, they would still be cannon fodder. The group nodded. The little black snake also looked at Zhou Xuanji anxiously. At this point, he did not want Zhou Xuanji to die here. Only by following Zhou Xuanji could he live a good life. He might break through to 6th rank someday. At this moment, Zhou Xuanji suddenly threw Ta Qi Xue toward Xiahou Gongji and leaped up. Seeing this, Xiahou Gongji's eyes were filled with a horrifying murderous intent. He wanted Zhou Xuanji dead. "You dare to fool me? I will crush your bones and scatter your ashes." Xiahou Gongji roared furiously and leaped up to catch Ta Qi Xue, who was severely injured. Zhou Xuanji, who was in the air, raised the furious ape sword and slashed. "Bastards! Go to hell!" The furious ape sword, which was charged up, let out an earth-shattering roar. The captives who were escaping looked back. They saw a gigantic ancient ape formed by strong winds above Zhou Xuanji's head, roaring toward the sky. Shocking! Domineering! Everyone was stunned and opened their mouths wide instinctively. The sword Qi, which was hundreds of meters long, swept down and widened rapidly. It crushed the majestic city wall straight away. The entire king's city shook violently. The sword Qi collapsed buildings one after another. Before this horrifying destructive power, everything was like a piece of paper. Tens of thousands of evil cultivators were blinded by the sword gleam and were drowned by dust immediately. Oh no! Just when Xiahou Gongji caught Ta Qi Xue, before he could move, the sword Qi landed. Boom! The city wall exploded, and dust billowed up. Broken rocks and wooden pillars flew in all directions, as though they were going to pierce through the sky. The entire wasteland shook, as though an earthquake was coming. Even Zhou Xuanji vomited blood from the impact of the explosion. His body was sent flying backward. Like a kite with a broken string, he flew far away. All the legendary swords flew toward him swiftly and disappeared into the supreme storage. Save our master! Zhao Tsongjian cried out and took the lead to fly on his sword. Beixiao Wangjian carried Han Shenhua and followed closely behind. Jiang Shui rode on big, while Huang Lianxin and the little black snake rode on small air. The group moved quickly without any hesitation. At the same time, the southern Snow King city was swept by the furious ape sword Qi. A quarter of the city turned into ruins. Chapter 107. The dragon eagles were extremely fast. Before Zhou Xuanji landed, big quickly flew over, and Jiang Shui hugged Zhou Xuanji. Go! Zhou Xuanji cried out with gritted teeth. Without his order, Zhao Tsongjian, Beixiao Wangjian, big, and small air all flew toward the horizon. On the ground, the captives who had been shocked also woke up with a start and fled in panic. This sword again. Last time in Guxia City, I heard that it was also this sword, accompanied by the roar of an angry ape. Too powerful. Sword God Zhou is invincible. Don't just stand there. Even Sword God Zhou escaped. Yes. If you lament any more, we'll be caught again. Wait for me. The captives cried out in alarm as they fled with all their might. After leaping over a mountain, Zhou Xuanji suddenly looked back. Following his gaze, Qiu Beili and a group of hidden sword sect cultivators were climbing the mountain. Qiu Beili was also looking at him. Their eyes met. Qiu Beili opened his mouth slightly. He revealed a smile on his face but didn't say anything. Nothing needed to be said. The kindness of the past must be repaid today. Looking back, the past events had come to an end. Both of them understood that they would no longer interact with each other. On Big's back, Zhou Xuanji and Jiang Shui quickly disappeared over the horizon. Qiu Beili smiled and said, "Incredible, incredible." A hidden sword sect disciple next to him asked curiously, "Master, what's so great about it?" "Sword God Zhou?" Qiu Beili shook his head and looked towards the horizon. "What I said that day might come true. You will stand shoulder to shoulder with the 9 emperors of the way of the sword. No, perhaps you will surpass them." The streets at the edge of the southern Snow Royal City were all in ruins. The city walls had collapsed, and dust was flying everywhere. One after another, demonic cultivators crawled out of the ruins with ashen faces. Almost all of them were injured. Most of the demonic cultivators had been smashed to pieces and had gone to the Yellow Springs to be reincarnated. Bang! A huge rock was lifted. Xiahou Gongji, who was covered in blood, slowly stood up while carrying Ta Qi Xue. His face was gloomy as he coughed out a mouthful of black blood. Ta Qi Xue, who was in his arms, was already dead and could not be more dead. Being struck by the furious ape sword at close range was extremely terrifying. Now, Zhou Xuanji was much more powerful than before. Accumulating energy for 1 day was equivalent to accumulating energy for 3 days. Even someone as strong as Xiahou Gongji was severely injured. He felt a burning pain in his internal organs. "Sword God Zhou," he gritted his teeth and said. These 3 words contained his endless anger. He did not know how to explain to Ta Tianchen about Ta Qi Xue's tragic death. But he understood one thing. He had to behead Sword God Zhou, or else Ta Tianchen would kill him. It wasn't just Ta Qi Xue. Tens of thousands of demonic cultivators were too close to him and less than 10% of them survived. Sword God Zhou alone had almost annihilated his evil sect. The more Xiahou Gongji thought about it, the angrier he became. His eyes were bloodshot. He put Ta Qi Xue down and started to recuperate. Sword God Zhou was too strange. He did not dare to rush up recklessly. Too treacherous. He purposely lied to me and made me think that he was at inner pellet stage 5. Xiahou Gongji took a deep breath and tried to calm himself down. The other side. Zhou Xuanji and the others flew 1,000 kilometers, not daring to slow down. They were afraid that Xinhao sect would catch up with them again. Jiang Shui treated Zhou Xuanji's injuries and asked, "Xuanji, are you feeling better?" Zhou Xuanji forced a smile. "I'm all right." Beixiao Wangjian came over on his sword and said excitedly, "This slash was even more powerful than the one in Great Zhou 2 years ago. Destroying a city with one slash. It was like going to heaven." Zhao Tsongjian was very excited too. He looked at Zhou Xuanji with admiration. "Practice your sword well. One day, you too will be able to do it too." Zhou Xuanji smiled at them. Although his smile was fatigued, it was as though a layer of radiance was shining in the eyes of the two. The little black snake wrapped around Small Air's neck and said in amazement, "I admire his mouth." The group continued to move forward. Even when the night fell, they did not stop. Until the next morning. They hid in a valley. They were surrounded by a forest. Even the top of the valley was covered by branches and leaves, which made it difficult to be discovered. After Zhou Xuanji landed, he immediately began to recuperate. This battle was fruitful. That slash could kill at least 10,000 to 20,000 evil cultivators. Besides, he had an epiphany during the battle. While accumulating energy, he used another sword technique at the same time. It was a great test of his control over his spirit energy. His talent in multitasking became even more powerful. He took out a spiritual pill from his storage ring and threw it into his mouth. The pill melted in his mouth and transformed into a warm current that healed his internal organs, tendons, and bones. "Master, should we rest here and avoid the limelight for a while before going to the Sword Monarch's pinnacle?" Huang Lianxin asked softly. This time, they were dealing with Xinhao sect. According to Zhou Xuanji, Ta Qixue was most likely dead. The death of the sect lord's grandson was quite troublesome. If it were in the past, it would have been a disaster for them. But now that they were following Zhou Xuanji, they did not feel too much pressure. "Amazing." Zhou Xuanji opened his eyes and said, "Let me rest for 2 days, then we will head straight to the Sword Monarch's pinnacle." He had already spread the news that the 1-year deadline was almost up. How could he not go? Wouldn't he be a laughingstock in the world? Zhao Tsongjian landed from the top of the valley and walked up to Zhou Xuanji and the rest. "I didn't see any evil cultivators from Xinhao sect. It seems like they suffered great losses and are unable to pursue us." After that, he looked at Zhou Xuanji passionately. Yesterday, when Xiahou Gongji unleashed his murderous aura, even though he was far away, he was still shocked. Facing such a horrifying cultivator, Zhou Xuanji could still suppress him with one slash. So domineering. Han Shenbua sat on a rock and said worriedly, "If we kill Ta Qixue, we will completely offend Xinhao sect. Do you know how horrifying Xinhao sect is? Unless they are protected by the emperor or a sanctum, no one can stop them." The little black snake flew over and whipped his face with its tail, sending him flying away. After it landed, it said with disdain, "You only know how to boost others' morale." So satisfying. Finally, someone could be tortured by it. Zhou Xuanji said, "Let's rest first and move out as soon as possible." The group had no objections and dispersed. Between the vast heavens and earth, there was a tall mountain that reached into the clouds. In front of it was a river, and on the left and right were forests that rose and fell. Behind it was a boundless plain. Looking from afar, it looked like a gigantic sword stabbed into the ground. It was majestic. The Sword Monarch's pinnacle. With the Sword Monarch's pinnacle as the center, cultivators came from all directions. Some walked on foot, some flew on their enchanted artifacts, and some rode on their mounts. They were all here to watch the duel between Sword God Zhou and the Sword Monarch. Although Sword God Zhou was only here to take his disciple, the Sword Noble, how could the two grandmasters of the Sword's Way meet peacefully? On the mountainside of the Sword Monarch's pinnacle, a group of Great Zhou's princes and princesses were drinking tea in the courtyard. Crown Prince Zhou Tianyu, Prince Zhou Qingxin, and Princess Xuanya were among them. The 1-year deadline is almost up. Why isn't Sword God Zhou here yet? Could it be that he's afraid? A prince asked with a smile while drinking. They planned to use this duel to rope in powerful cultivators from all over. Princess Xuanya, who was born with the embodiment of Tao, stared at him and said, "How can it be? Sword God Zhou is fearless." The prince did not dare to retort and could only smile awkwardly. Zhou Tianyu put down his cup and smiled. His opponent is the sword monarch of Great Zhou after all. He might be regretting it already. Princess Xuanya stared at him, but because he was the crown prince, she did not retort. At this moment, a royal soldier of Great Zhou flew over the clouds and landed in front of the princes and princesses. Report. 7 days ago, Sword God Zhou went to the southern Snow King's city alone. He killed Tachi Xue and tens of thousands of evil disciples and saved all the citizens in the city. Even General Meng was saved by him. His journey was delayed because of this. I estimate that he will reach the Sword Monarch's pinnacle in half a month. The royal soldier said with a deep voice. His face was filled with excitement. Sword God Zhou's action was absolutely hot-blooded to the soldiers. What? How can it be? Zhou Tianyu slammed the table and stood up. His face was filled with shock. Chapter 108. He killed Tachi Xue? And 10,000 evil cultivators? How can it be? Wasn't there a Xinhao sect elder protecting Tachi Xue? How could he let him get away with it? Zhou Tianyu grabbed the royal soldier and asked excitedly. His face was covered in cold sweat, and his body was trembling. The royal soldier was frightened by his expression and replied carefully, "It's true. That Xinhao sect elder was severely injured by Sword God Zhou and almost died. General Meng wrote a letter to me personally." He could tell that Zhou Tianyu was furious, so he did not dare to show his excitement. He despised Zhou Tianyu in his heart. You want to be the emperor with such magnanimity? Sword God Zhou never offended you. You were the one who talked big. Now that Sword God Zhou saved so many people, you are still angry? No wonder you were always suppressed by Zhou Yalong. Princess Xuanya giggled. I knew it. Sword God Zhou is not afraid of the Sword Monarch. Zhou Qingxi nodded as well. Sword God Zhou is really a role model for our generation. When Great Zhou is in danger, he is not afraid of offending Xinhao sect. The righteous and benevolent Sword God Zhou is not just for show. Hearing the two of them echoing each other, Zhou Tianyu's face turned even uglier. The other princes saw the situation and also added insult to injury. With this achievement, even if Sword God Zhou is not as good as the Sword Monarch, he is still qualified to challenge the Sword Monarch. It would be great if we could rope him in. This person is definitely a ferocious being who can fight against 1,000,000 soldiers alone. Yeah. Who would want to offend such a person? I really want to see Sword God Zhou's glory soon. Soon. The battle between the two peerless experts will definitely be a story that will be told throughout the ages. Emperor Yan of Zhou had lived for thousands of years and had countless children. There were more than 100 princes. Most of the princes who came to the Sword Monarch's pinnacle wanted to be the crown prince. Once they had the chance, they would step on the crown prince. Zhou Tianyu was furious, but he did not explode in case he became a joke. In less than half a day, the news of Sword God Zhou invading the southern Snow King's city spread across the Sword Monarch's pinnacle. The news shocked the cultivators. At the same time, they looked forward to the battle between Sword God Zhou and the Sword Monarch. At the top of the Sword Monarch's pinnacle, there were many pavilions and palaces. At a glance, there were at least 1,000 of them, and they were all residences of the Sword Monarch's disciples and grand disciples. In one of the courtyards, Xiao Jinghong was practicing his swordsmanship. He was dressed in black, and his movements were as swift as a swan. Gusts of strong wind were created as he swung his sword, sweeping up the fallen leaves in the courtyard. At this moment, a beautiful woman in a white dress walked into the courtyard. Jinghong, you're really hardworking. You've never slacked off. The white-dressed lady smiled as she looked at Xiao Jinghong with a brilliant light in her eyes. Xiao Jinghong ignored him and continued to practice his swordsmanship. I just received some news about Sword God Zhou. Do you want to hear it? The woman in a white dress smiled as she asked. Xiao Jinghong immediately stopped when he heard this, and then he put his sword away before he turned around to look at her and said, Speak. Sword God Zhou killed Tachi Xue and severely injured Xinhao sect's elder, Xiahou Gongji. He rescued tens of thousands of captives and is rushing towards the Sword Monarch's pinnacle. The woman in the white dress said slowly. She couldn't help but be surprised when she mentioned this. In her heart, Sword God Zhou was not very powerful. But this matter changed her opinion. In the current Great Zhou, how many people could be as brave and righteous as Sword God Zhou? No wonder Xiao Jinghong was so loyal to him. Xiao Jinghong smiled and shook his head. Then, he turned around and continued practicing. The lady in the white dress asked curiously, "If Sword God Zhou comes to ask for you, my grand teacher will surely seek him out. Aren't you afraid that something might happen to Sword God Zhou? After all, swords have no eyes." Sword God Zhou's power had always been a mystery. When he fought against an inner pellet cultivator, he was said to be injured. Now, he could even kill an astral infant cultivator. It was really strange. However, the Sword Monarch was different. He was an unparalleled cultivator who stood at the peak of Great Zhou. No matter how powerful Sword God Zhou was, he would not be a match for the Sword Monarch. Xiao Jinghong replied as he swung his sword, "My teacher has never been defeated before." Invincible. Has the Sword Monarch of Great Zhou ever been undefeated? Although Xiao Jinghong had a rough understanding of Zhou Xuanji's power, he was still willing to trust him. Zhou Xuanji was young, but he was experienced. He would never do anything that he was not confident in. Zhou Xuanji said that he could take him away, so he could. The woman in the white dress opened her mouth, wanting to say something but hesitating. Thousands of words were stuck in her mouth. The beauty has feelings, but the gentleman is heartless. Hoo. The two dragon eagles landed, followed by Zhou Xuanji and Jiang Shui. Zhao Tsongjian, Bei Shao Wangjian, Huang Lianxin, the little black snake, and Han Shenhua all landed. They stood on the peak and looked ahead. They could already see the Sword Monarch's pinnacle. Zhou Xuanji's white shirt fluttered in the wind. His handsome and calm face looked extraordinarily determined at this moment. "Are you ready?" Zhou Xuanji asked. His voice was soft, but the wind could not drown it. Zhao Tsongjian said proudly, "I'm ready. I'm waiting for Master's order." Bei Shao Wangjian laughed. "No matter if we win or lose this battle, our lives will not be in vain." Huang Lianxin smiled sweetly. "I will follow Master forever." Jiang Shui took out her flaming fan and giggled. "We are waiting for you to pave the way." They had accompanied Zhou Xuanji through crisis after crisis. Their hearts were already united and could not be shaken. The little black snake looked at the Sword Monarch's pinnacle and swallowed his saliva. "Should we start from bomb?" Zhao Tsongjian kicked him off the cliff. Han Shenhua, who was about to persuade Zhou Xuanji, trembled in fear and quickly covered his mouth. Too horrifying. Zhou Xuanji leaped off the cliff, and the others followed closely behind. Bei Shao Wangjian kicked Han Shenhua's butt and leaped off as well. F*CKU. Before Han Shenhua could finish cursing, he was caught by Bei Shao Wangjian and almost fainted. After they landed, the group stood in a row and walked toward the Sword Monarch's pinnacle. Zhou Xuanji walked in the middle, while a big and small heir walked by his sides. In front of them was an uneven mountainous terrain. After another 10 miles, they would reach the foot of the Sword Monarch's pinnacle. "After this battle, I will not let you off." The little black snake, who was seeing stars, got up shakily. He cursed as he caught up with the group. The majestic Sword Monarch's pinnacle was indomitable, just like the Sword Monarch's position in Great Zhou. It was lofty and unsurpassable. Zhou Xuanji walked ahead slowly. To be honest, he did not have much confidence. But Xiao Jinghong had to be rescued. Moreover, he had just rescued so many captives. For the sake of his reputation, the Sword Monarch would not kill him. The Sword Monarch's image had always been that of a powerful and righteous grandmaster. There was almost no blemish on his life. "Sky-sundering Sword Emperor, don't disappoint me," Zhou Xuanji said in his heart, and confidence returned to his eyes. Soon, some cultivators who passed by noticed Zhou Xuanji and the others. 2 dragon eagles. That was the symbol of Sword God Zhou. "Sword God Zhou is here." The cultivator shouted excitedly at the top of his lungs. His voice traveled for miles and was heard by other cultivators. Soon, the entire Sword Monarch's pinnacle was alarmed. Swoosh! 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 Numerous cultivators came on their swords, clouds, or on their enchanted artifacts. Looking at the imposing manner of Zhou Xuanji and the others, they were all excited and excited. Sword God Zhou! You must bring the sword noble out! A female cultivator screamed. In recent years, the sword monarch did not achieve much, while Sword God Zhou was at his peak. Naturally, many people supported him. Chapter 109. The female cultivator's cry caused the other cultivators to also cry out. Under the sky, thousands of cultivators cheered for Zhou Xuanji, their voices shaking the heavens. Sword God Zhou! I believe you! Sword God Zhou, don't lose too badly. It's okay if you lose this time. Wait another 100 years, and you will be at the peak of Great Zhou's way of the sword. He is Sword God Zhou? What an elegant young man. What happened to his childlike appearance? That's Zhao Zongjian. Oh my god! Han Shenhua, who was ranked first on Great Zhou's hero ranking board, also followed Sword God Zhou. Is he also Sword God Zhou's disciple? Very quickly, someone noticed Han Shenhua, which immediately caused an even greater uproar. As the number one on the hero leaderboard of the Great Zhou, Han Shenhua's reputation was always in the top 50 of the Great Zhou's honor leaderboard. Even Zhao Zongjian was no match for him. When Han Shenhua heard those exclamations, he hurriedly lowered his head in embarrassment. His face felt hot, and he wished he could dig the ground and escape. He was not Zhou Xuanji's disciple. He wasn't even a sword slave. Even that black crawler could bully the lowliest slave. Jiang Shui looked around and realized that more and more people were gathering. She was surprised and murmured, "So many people." She underestimated the fame of Sword God Zhou and the Sword Monarch of Great Zhou. Zhao Zongjian said in a low voice, "This matter has already become the biggest concern of the Zhou dynasty and the surrounding dynasties. It has not even been overshadowed by the war at the borders. Even the Xinhao sect is very concerned about it. Many sects and clans have come to watch the battle. I reckon there are even more people on the Sword Monarch's peak." He was excited and his blood was boiling. How good would it be if he was the protagonist of this battle? Unfortunately, his strength was insufficient. Another 500 years and the Great Zhou dynasty would be his. Han Shenhua sighed and said, "The Sword Monarch of Great Zhou is really powerful. If we lose this battle, you might have to die as well. Who knows, after today, Sword God Zhou might become the Sword Monarch's disciple." Northern Sword Valiant glared at him, scaring him into hiding. He did not have the demeanor of the number one on the hero ranking board. The cultivators began to land. They looked at Zhou Xuanji and the others from afar and followed them toward the Sword Monarch's pinnacle. Sizing up Zhou Xuanji and the others at such a close distance, they felt that their auras were extraordinary. The difference between people was so great. Of course, this could be a psychological effect. Meanwhile, the Sword Monarch's pinnacle was in an uproar. All the cultivators came to the edge of the cliff to look at the plain, wanting to see Zhou Xuanji, including the princes. Zhou Qingxin was at the enlightening stage and had extraordinary eyesight. He quickly discovered Zhou Xuanji and the others. He widened his eyes and exclaimed, "Han Shenhua! Why is he following Sword God Zhou?" When the princes heard this, they were all stunned. "Are you the number one on the hero ranking board, Han Shenhua?" A princess widened her eyes in disbelief. She had seen Han Shenhua's elegance before. He was indeed a dragon among men and was unwilling to be under anyone. Why would he follow Sword God Zhou? Everyone knew that Sword God Zhou only had sword slaves, disciples, or demon pets. Zhou Tianyu gritted his teeth. He prayed in his heart that Sword God Zhou would die on the Sword Monarch's pinnacle. Otherwise, he would become the laughingstock of the world and miss the opportunity to become the Great Zhou Emperor. Under everyone's gaze, Zhou Xuanji and the others got closer and closer to the Sword Monarch's pinnacle. Boom! A strand of sword chi that soared into the sky erupted from the peak of the Sword Monarch's peak. It blasted apart the sea of clouds and formed a vortex that blotted out the sky. It was an extremely magnificent sight. The entire Sword Monarch's pinnacle shook. The boundless sword might envelop the heavens and the earth, which awed everyone. Zhou Xuanji looked up and squinted his eyes. Such a powerful sword might that made him feel helpless must be the Sword Monarch of Great Zhou. Trying to show off his strength? Zhou Xuanji smiled and continued forward. The others became anxious. Before they even reached the top of the mountain, The sword monarch had already unleashed his sword Qi. A great battle was unavoidable. Screech! A bird cry came from the horizon, which attracted countless people's attention. They saw a firebird with a wingspan of 30 meters dashing toward them from the horizon. It looked like an eagle and a sparrow at the same time. An old lady stood on its head. She wore a red robe, and her hair was like flames. Firebird old lady from 100 Birds sect. Someone cried out in surprise, which stirred up a huge commotion. 100 Birds sect was one of the top sects around Great Zhou. It was a few times more powerful than the demonic Inferno sect. The Firebird old lady was hot-tempered and always did things that were out of line. She was a regular in the top 30 of Great Zhou's reputation ranking. Sword Monarch, I'm here to observe the battle today. I want to see if anyone can take away your favored genius from under your nose. The Firebird old lady said with a smile. Her voice was cold, which was different from her appearance. It sent chills down everyone's spine. She glanced at Zhou Xuanji and the others before riding on the Firebird into the Sword Monarch's pinnacle. She's looking for help? The little black snake opened his eyes wide and cursed. This old man. This is really interesting. I despise him. No one replied to him. No matter what, they had no way out. They had to ascend the mountain. The 1,000 cultivators behind them were discussing about this. They were all guessing why the Firebird old lady came. At the top of the Sword Monarch's pinnacle, after the sword Qi dissipated, a palace appeared below. The Firebird old lady walked into the palace quickly. The space inside was spacious and bright. There were hundreds of chairs on both sides, divided into 2 rows. At the end of the hall, there was a magnificent platform. A majestic silhouette sat on it. The Sword Monarch of Great Zhou. He wore a black robe embroidered with a fire qilin and a yellow tiger. He sat boldly with a golden saber. His face was majestic, and his eyes were intimidating. He had a 10-inch beard, and his hair was let down casually in front while the hair at the back was coiled into a beaded golden crown. Next to his legs, there was a black sword that was 1.5 meters long, about the same height as he was sitting. The monarch of the Sword's Way of Great Zhou. His imposing manner was unparalleled. He stared at the Firebird old lady and asked, "Why are you here, my dear sister?" His voice was a little hoarse, and it was filled with a heavenly pressure. The Firebird old lady snorted, "I heard that someone in Great Zhou dared to challenge your authority. Of course I came to take a look." The Sword Monarch waved his hand, and a disciple immediately walked to his right. The disciple took out a chair and gestured for the Firebird old lady to sit. On the left side of the palace sat the disciples and grand disciples whom the Sword Monarch valued. On the right side sat the guests, who were all influential people. Xiao Jinghong and Xie Wuyo sat in the front row. Seeing the Firebird old lady, Xiao Jinghong frowned. From her words, it was obvious that she did not come with good intentions. After they sat down, the Firebird old lady continued to ask, "I saw Sword God Zhou just now. He's only so-so, not even comparable to your closed-door disciples. How can such an arrogant person be worthy for you to deal with him personally?" With this, the Sword Monarch's disciples all nodded and began to speak. "Revered Master doesn't need to do anything. I can deal with him." "That's right. I'm afraid that the news of him defeating Xin Hao Sect's elder was just a rumor. Eldest senior brother should have dealt with him back then. If we kill him now, it will only dirty Revered Master's clothes. Let us senior and junior brothers do it. If Revered Master does it, it will only bring shame to Revered Master." "Ha ha ha, even Senior Hua said so. It must be true." Hearing the arrogant words of these sword cultivators, Xiao Jinghong snorted coldly, displeased. The lady in white beside him glanced at him worriedly, but she did not say anything. The Sword Monarch was expressionless. He raised his hand and pressed down. The palace was silent. He said slowly, "He has dual sword wills and can control 9 swords. We cannot underestimate him. He is a righteous and upright person, so I treat him seriously. That is my respect for him." Chapter 110. Hearing that the Sword Monarch was going to face Sword God Zhou seriously, all the guests observed a moment of silence for Sword God Zhou. Xiao Jinghong frowned even more and began to worry about Zhou Xuanji. The sword Qi that shot into the sky was so powerful that it was almost invincible. Could Zhou Xuanji really deal with him? Everyone in the palace began to talk cheerfully and did not take Zhou Xuanji seriously at all. The cultivators who did not have the right to enter the palace were instead looking forward to Zhou Xuanji's performance. It was the nature of most people to like the new and dislike the old. The sword monarch of Great Zhou had been famous for a long time, and many people hoped that someone could shake his position. There was hope for sword god Zhou, who appeared out of nowhere. All the paths on the sword monarch's pinnacle were packed with people. Many cultivators were even levitating in the air, looking at Zhou Xuanji. There were at least 200,000 people gathered at the sword monarch's peak. The number of people was still increasing. Cultivators were rushing over from all directions. The news about sword god Zhou arriving at the sword monarch's pinnacle was also spread. Zhou Xuanji came to the foot of the sword monarch's pinnacle and walked up the mountain path. "Can you walk faster?" The little black snake couldn't help but ridicule. How tall was the sword monarch's peak? How many days and nights would it take to walk up like this? Northern Sword Valiant glared at it and scoffed. "What do you know? This is called vigor." Zhou Xuanji did not reply and maintained his calm expression. Unbeknownst to them, he was silently counting the time in his heart. Along the way, the cultivators cried out in surprise from time to time. Regardless of whether it was the dragon eagles, Zhou Xuanji, Zhao Zongjian, or Han Shenhua, they were all eye-catching. Even Jiang Shui and Huang Lianxin's beauty attracted much discussion. After walking for half an hour, Zhou Xuanji leaped up suddenly and flew toward the peak of the sword monarch's pinnacle. The others followed closely behind, and Han Shenhua was carried by Bei Xiao Wangjian. The group of people were like immortals flying in the sky. The two dragon eagles even let out a long and penetrating cry, shocking the rocks on the mountain top. Soon, Zhou Xuanji and the others passed by where the princes and princesses of Great Zhou were. Zhou Qingxin shouted loudly, "Senior sword god Zhou, you must win." Zhou Tianyu glared at him, very unhappy. Princess Xuanya cupped her cheeks with her hands, looking like a love-struck fool. Sword god Zhou grew more and more handsome. Because of the special relationship between the royal family of Great Zhou and the sword monarch of Great Zhou, the princes and princesses did not go to the top of the mountain to avoid gossip. It could be said that he was here to watch the show. All eyes were on him, and the winds and clouds of the world were gathering. Zhou Xuanji and the others quickly flew toward the top of the sword monarch's pinnacle. "Sword monarch of Great Zhou, today, I've come to bring my disciple home." Zhou Xuanji channeled his spirit energy and cried out, his voice resounding across the heavens and earth. His shout ignited everyone's hot blood. This was the sword god Zhou they were familiar with. Brave and fearless. He was not afraid of anything. He even dared to offend the Empress of Great Zhou. Cheers and shouts rang out once more, shaking the sea of clouds and reverberating through the plains. Zhao Zongjian, Bei Xiao Wangjian, and the rest felt their blood boiling. They could not wait to draw their swords and fight to the death with the sword monarch. The little black snake on Waiter's back was speechless. This momentum is really crazy. It had lived for thousands of years and had rarely seen such a magnificent scene. In the deafening clamor, Zhou Xuanji and the rest landed on the square in front of the palace at the top of the mountain. In front of the palace, there were two god statues, each holding a long sword. They looked majestic, as though they could slay all evil spirits. "Sword god Zhou, come in for a gathering." The sword monarch's calm and steady voice came from the palace. Zhou Xuanji glanced at Jiang Shui. Jiang Shui nodded. She held the flaming fan in her hand and looked fearless. Zhou Xuanji immediately walked forward. Zhao Zongjian, Jiang Shui, Bei Xiao Wangjian, and the rest followed closely behind. The two dragon eagles stayed outside. When Zhou Xuanji stepped through the door of the palace, all eyes in the palace fell on him. Most of them were filled with disdain and curiosity. Xiao Jinghong was very excited. He almost stood up, but the lady in the white dress pressed down on the back of his hand. She shook her head and signaled him not to act recklessly. The sword monarch's gaze also fell on Zhou Xuanji. His eyes were filled with judgment, and he frowned slightly. Zhou Xuanji was weaker than he imagined. How could he kill Ta Qixue and severely injure the elder of Xinhao sect with such power? Inner pellet level 5? Is that a joke? An old man with a long beard laughed suddenly. His face was filled with disdain. Just when he spoke, the other guests and sword cultivators began to mock Zhou Xuanji. Inner pellet level 5? Ha ha ha, the great sword god Zhou only has such a low cultivation? I'm dying of laughter. I'm afraid that I can defeat him with one hand if I go up. Young man, take out your sword. Let's see what kind of legendary sword can make you so majestic. Tisk tiske. He is not a child. He's much taller than the rumors say. Isn't that Han Shenbua? The voices outside were real. He followed sword god Zhou and brought shame to the reputation of great Zhou's hero ranking board. They mocked Zhou Xuanji wantonly. Most of them were exaggerating to please the sword monarch. Han Shenbua heard them and gnashed his teeth. These bastards are too despicable. The firebird old lady stared at Zhou Xuanji and laughed mockingly. With such cultivation, even if you master the sword will, how powerful can you be? You might have killed an astral infant cultivator by luck, but that was the power of a sword. The difference between you and the sword monarch cannot be made up for by a sword. Jiang Shui, Huang Lianxin, and Bei Xiao Wangjian were furious. Zhao Zongjin's eyes were also flashing with murderous intent. The little black snake spat its forked tongue and mumbled in its heart. How long has it been since this old lady vented her anger? It did not dare to say it out, lest it died on the spot. Zhou Xuanji took a step forward and looked at Xiao Jinghong. My disciple, stand up. Xiao Jinghong stood up without hesitation. The sword cultivators touched their sword hilts to prevent Zhou Xuanji and Xiao Jinghong from escaping at any time. In my opinion, everyone here is trash, Yi Zichen said coldly. Do you understand what trash is? It's trash. Trash that only knows how to talk. Zhou Xuanji said calmly, and his voice reverberated in the hall. Numerous legendary swords appeared around him out of nowhere. Silver, gold, and amethyst legendary swords, each with their own might. As for the legendary swords of lower grades, he did not take them out to avoid wasting them. Silence. There was silence in the hall. Everyone was stunned. Is this guy crazy? Such arrogant words. Is he not afraid of being attacked by the group? They exploded immediately and cursed at Zhou Xuanji. Some even stood up and were ready to attack. Sword God Zhou. The sword monarch of Great Zhou suddenly spoke. His voice was filled with might, causing everyone to shut up and return to their seats. Zhou Xuanji stared at the sword monarch. Their eyes met. Neither of them could see through each other. Xiao Jinghong is a genius in the sword's way. Why can't he follow me? Are you going to ruin his future just for your reputation? The sword monarch asked. His tone was indescribably domineering. He was the monarch of the sword's way. In the entire Great Zhou, no one could compete with him in the sword's way. Zhou Xuanji smiled and said, because he is a genius, only I can teach him well. With this, the sword monarch's disciples and grand disciples were all enraged. Xie Wuyo slapped his leg and stood up. He pointed at Zhou Xuanji and cursed, Sword God Zhou, do you really think that you are a sword god? My revered teacher has cultivated for 3,000 years. In the sword's way, he is unparalleled. How can you compete with him? The other sword cultivators cursed at Zhou Xuanji as though they were going to drown him with their saliva. Analyze that the sword owner has reached 16 years old. Gotcha started. Ding! Congratulations, the sword owner obtained Glorious Gold, God Emperor Sword, Silver, Crazy Paralysis Sword, Herculean Divine Pill, Raging Wave Mysterious Spirit Chain. The sword spirit's voice resounded in Zhou Xuanji's mind. His pupils contracted, and he smiled even higher. Glorious Gold. A legendary sword that was even more powerful than amethyst. It came just in time. Sword God Zhou, only the weak are good at talking. If you were more powerful than me, would Xiao Jinghong still be my disciple? You are indeed talented, but how can you compete with me now? The sword monarch stood up slowly. A horrifying sword will made all the sword cultivators' swords vibrate uncontrollably. Around Zhou Xuanji, the silver-grade legendary swords vibrated as well. Jiang Shui, Zhao Zongjin, Bei Xiao Wangjian, and the others' faces turned pale. Such a horrifying sword will. However, Zhou Xuanji laughed. Why? Because I am 16 years old today. Today's third update. I received a notice that it will be available tomorrow. Thousands of words converged into one word. Explosive updates. Ever since he published the book, he updated 3 times a day, regardless of rain or shine. He was quite dedicated, but he did not release any explosive updates. Tomorrow, at noon sharp, he will release explosive updates. Saving chapters for the whole night. Let's see how much I can write. Speaking of which, according to the statistics of this book, there were 20,000 people who read the latest chapter every day, but there were not many people in the book comment section, which made me a little angry. Everyone, leave a comment at the end of this chapter. Let me see how many people there are. Don't flood the screen. The more people leave a comment, the more explosive I will be tomorrow. Starting from 10 chapters. Chapter 111. 16 years old? Everyone in the hall was stunned. In their hearts, Xueqi was an old monster with a childish face. They did not expect him to be only 16 years old. So what if she's 16? Go home and drink milk. The firebird old lady snorted coldly. She could not bear to see Xueqi showing off. The sword monarch laughed out loud. His laughter passed through the walls of the palace and echoed in the sky. If you can hurt me today, I'll let you take Xiao Jinghong away. As soon as he said that, countless cultivators were convinced. This was the sword monarch of Great Zhou. He would never bully the weak or the strong. Even so, how difficult would it be to injure the sword monarch? Xueqi was looking at the few lines of words that only he could see. Sword name, God Emperor Sword, level, glorious gold. Description, created by the chi of an emperor for tens of thousands of years. It contains the power of ghosts and gods and the domineering aura of an emperor. Those who are not born with the fate of an emperor cannot use it. Sword name, Crazy Paralysis Sword, level, silver. Description, refined from the poisonous juice of the mad paralysis demonic grass. Once the blade cuts the skin, the victim will be poisoned by the mad paralysis demonic grass, becoming delirious and paralyzed. Xueqi's attention was attracted by the God Emperor Sword. The power of the ghost god. The domineering aura of an emperor. Those who were not born with the fate of an emperor could not use it. He had the imperial purple aura, so wasn't that just right? The amethyst rank sky-sundering emperor sword was already so powerful. How much more powerful would a glorious gold-rank divine sword be? He suppressed his excitement and sighed in his heart. Sword spirit, you're really a timely help. According to the Northern Wilderness region's time, the sword master has come of age today and is extremely lucky. That's why you are able to obtain the glorious gold legendary sword. However, I have to remind you that it's too risky to use the glorious gold legendary sword with your current strength. The sword spirit replied, which made Xueqi squint his eyes. If I were to use the God Emperor Sword's special ability and the Sky Sundering Emperor Sword's ancient sword emperor power at the same time, how long could I last? At most half an incense's time. Once the time limit is exceeded, the sword master will explode and die. Even if he doesn't exceed the time limit, once the time limit is over, the sword master will be severely injured. Half the time it takes for an incense stick to burn. In the Northern Wilderness region, one joss stick's worth of time was about half an hour, which meant 15 minutes. There was still plenty of time. It seemed that his physical fitness was not bad. What? Are you scared? If you don't dare, you can leave. Of course, if you want to become my disciple, you still have a chance. The sword monarch's voice came again and interrupted Xueqi's thoughts. He looked up and said, since that's the case, let's cut the crap and make our move. He raised his right hand and grabbed the sky-sundering emperor sword beside him. You guys, get out of the way, Xueqi said with a deep voice. Having heard him, Jiang Xue and the others immediately left the palace. With Xueqi's and the sword monarch's power, they would definitely not compete in the palace. At the same time, numerous cultivators had gathered on the square outside, and there were even many cultivators that relied on flying magic artifacts and techniques to float in the air at the edge of the peak of Sword Monarch's peak. All of them were waiting with bated breath. The Sword Monarch stared at the sky-sundering Emperor sword, and his eyes brightened. He praised, "What a peerless sword!" After that, the Sword Monarch suddenly pulled out the two black swords in front of him and thrust them toward Xueqi. The horrifying sword chi came at him with a powerful gale. Xueqi's expression changed slightly, and he instinctively blocked with the sky-sundering Emperor sword. There was a loud bang. He was blasted out of the palace, along with his 15 silver and gold legendary swords. Everyone in the hall was startled. So domineering. The sky-sundering Emperor sword deflected most of the sword chi. Zhou Xuanji somersaulted in the air and landed steadily. He slid backward for dozens of meters and almost fell off the cliff. This scene caused the surrounding spectators to shudder with fear. Sword God Zhou was at a disadvantage right from the beginning? They were not surprised, but they felt a little regretful. It seemed that Sword God Zhou still could not shake the Sword Monarch's position. Zhou Xuanji stood up slowly. He raised his left hand, and a giant sword appeared in his hand. The sword was 2 meters long, and its blade was black. It was 1.5 feet wide. In the center of both sides, there was a long black dragon that looked vivid and majestic. The guard was like 2 dragon claws, and the claws pointed toward the blade. The hilt was covered with black scales and had a metallic texture. At the end of the hilt was a crystal that looked like a crown, glowing with a red light. Glorious gold legendary sword. God Emperor sword. With this sword in hand, a visible purple chi rose from Zhou Xuanji's feet and surrounded his body, which transformed his entire aura. At this moment, he was like an emperor above all others. High and mighty, insufferably arrogant. Zhou Xuanji felt that nothing in the world could stand up to him. Such an inflated temperament made him smile uncontrollably. Such a powerful feeling. Is this the glorious gold legendary sword? Zhou Xuanji mumbled to himself. He felt like he was bewitched. Jiang Shui, Zhao Congjian, Bei Shao Wangjian, and the others also noticed the God Emperor sword in his hand. Zhao Congjian opened his eyes wide and mumbled, "Such a domineering sword." When he saw the God Emperor sword, he suddenly felt that his sword was so ordinary. Not only them, but the thousands of spectators also noticed it. What sword is that? So majestic. Count, how many swords does Sword God Zhou have? 17. He has more than 9 swords. No wonder the enemies he kills are getting more powerful. These swords look so powerful. Sword God Zhou is getting serious. Seeing Zhou Xuanji in such a state, the cultivators were all excited. Looking at his aura, Sword God Zhou might really be able to fight against the Sword Monarch. At this moment, the Sword Monarch held his sword with both hands and walked out of the palace. The two of them were about 300 meters apart. They looked at each other from afar. What sword is that? The Sword Monarch frowned slightly. When he saw the God Emperor sword, he felt a sense of danger. It's not an ordinary sword. He liked the sky-sundering Emperor sword earlier, but the God Emperor sword made him want to take it for himself. Only he, the Sword Monarch, deserves such a legendary sword. But with so many people watching, he naturally could not snatch the God Emperor sword. He flew up slowly toward Zhou Xuanji. His robe fluttered in the wind, and his sword chi appeared like a flame. He flew up into the sky and looked down at Zhou Xuanji. Sword God Zhou, I will give you one more chance. If you admit defeat, I will let it go. If you insist on going about things the wrong way, the blade has no eyes, and you will lose your life. The demeanor of a grandmaster was fully displayed. He gave Sword God Zhou chances again and again. It was flawless and flawless. Zhou Xuanji activated the power of the ancient Sword Emperor straightaway, and his aura grew tremendously. The power of the ancient Sword Emperor could be used once a year without any side effects. He held it back for a year and did not even use it against Xinhao sect, because he wanted to use it against the Sword Monarch. If he still could not defeat the Sword Monarch, then he would use the glorious gold legendary sword to show off his prowess. The power of the ancient Sword Emperor strengthened his body, and the purple forceful chi around Zhou Xuanji's body increased. He bent his right leg. Boom! The hard ground crumbled under his stomp. He shot up into the sky like a sharp arrow. 15 legendary swords followed closely behind him. The scene was so majestic that many cultivators' jaws dropped. You're tuning in to the Xueqi's Martial Arts Saga YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.